Before gods walked among mortals, before heroes carved their names into legend, and before the familiar pantheon of Mount Olympus established dominion over the world, there existed only chaos, an infinite, formless void that predated all existence. This primordial state was not merely emptiness, but rather a swirling, indefinable expanse from which all reality would eventually emerge. The ancient Greeks understood chaos not as destruction, but as the fundamental source, the womb of creation itself. From this primeval abyss, the first conscious entities spontaneously manifested through forces beyond comprehension. These were not gods as later generations would understand them, but rather personifications of the most basic elements of existence. Gaia emerged first among these primordial beings, her form encompassing the entirety of what would become Earth. She was not merely a goddess of the earth, but was the earth itself. Every mountain, valley, plain, and ocean floor constituted her physical being. Her consciousness permeated every grain of soil, every stone, and every crystal formation that would later house precious metals and gems. Simultaneously with Gaia's emergence, Tartarus took form as the deepest, most remote region of the underworld. Unlike the later concept of Hades' realm, Tartarus represented something far more primordial and terrible, a cosmic prison located beneath even the foundations of the earth. This realm stretched downward from Gaia's lowest depths, creating a chasm so profound that a bronze anvil dropped from the earth's surface would fall for 9 days and nights before reaching its boundaries. Tartarus existed as both a place and a conscious entity, his awareness extending throughout the shadowy depths that would later serve as the ultimate punishment for those who defied the cosmic order. Eros materialized as the third primordial force, though this deity bore little resemblance to the later cherubic figure of Roman mythology. The primordial Eros embodied the fundamental attractive force that would drive all creation, not merely romantic or sexual love, but the cosmic principle that compels separate entities to unite and create new forms of existence. His influence would prove essential in the formation of all subsequent divine unions and the continuation of the cosmic generations. This Eros possessed an otherworldly beauty that transcended physical form, manifesting as pure creative energy that sparked desire and procreation throughout the emerging cosmos. Erebus and Nyx emerged as complementary forces representing the primal darkness that existed before light had any meaning. Erebus embodied the deep darkness of the underworld, the impenetrable shadow that filled the spaces between Earth and the lowest depths. His darkness was not merely the absence of light, but an active, substantial force that could be felt and experienced as a tangible presence. Nyx, his counterpart, represented the darkness of night that would eventually blanket the upper world. Her form was that of a woman of incomparable beauty, draped in star-spangled robes that seemed to contain the essence of nighttime itself. When she spread her arms, darkness flowed from her like a living substance, bringing rest and dreams to all creation. These 5 primordial entities, Gaia, Tartarus, Eros, Erebus, and Nyx, established the fundamental framework upon which all subsequent creation would build. Their existence created the basic cosmic structure: Earth, underworld, creative force, and the dual nature of darkness. Yet the cosmos remained incomplete, lacking the celestial realm that would balance Gaia's terrestrial domain. Gaia, through her own divine will and creative power, generated Uranus without the need for a mate. This self-creation represented the Earth's natural tendency to reach upward, to create the vast dome of sky that would arch over her surface. Uranus emerged as her equal in size and grandeur, his form encompassing the entire heavens, his body stretched across the cosmic expanse, studded with stars that gleamed like jewels against his dark flesh. During the day, his form appeared as the bright blue dome familiar to mortals, but at night his true nature became visible as the star-filled darkness that curved from horizon to horizon. The union between Gaia and Uranus represented the first divine marriage, the archetypal joining of earth and sky that would echo throughout Greek mythology. Their coupling was not a single event, but an ongoing cosmic phenomenon. Each night Uranus would descend to embrace Gaia, covering her entirely with his vast form. From this continuous union, the first generation of divine offspring would emerge, beings far more complex and powerful than their primordial predecessors. The 12 Titans constituted the first and most significant children of this cosmic marriage. These beings possessed both the primal power of their parents and a more defined consciousness that would allow them to actively shape the developing world. Oceanus emerged as the eldest, his form encompassing the great river that the Greeks believed encircled the entire world. His body was that of a bearded man whose lower half transformed into flowing water, and his voice carried the sound of rushing streams and crashing waves. Coeus embodied the intellectual aspect of the heavens, representing the axis around which the celestial sphere rotated. His consciousness encompassed the mathematical principles that governed the movement of stars and the passage of time. Crius manifested as the constellation bearer, his body serving as the foundation upon which the star patterns would be arranged. Hyperion blazed with the light that would later be refined into the sun's radiance, his form radiating a golden glow that could illuminate vast distances. Iapetus stood as the pillar of the west, his massive form helping to support the weight of the sky. His strength was legendary even among the Titans, and his body bore the scars of constantly bearing the celestial burden. Cronus, who would later play such a crucial role in cosmic history, emerged with an innate understanding of time's passage and the cyclical nature of existence. His appearance was that of a mature man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, though his expression often carried a troubling intensity. The female Titans brought their own unique powers to the cosmic order. Theia radiated the divine light that would make vision possible, her form shimmering with an opalescent glow that shifted through every colour of the spectrum. Rhea embodied the flowing nature of time and the nurturing aspects of motherhood, her presence bringing comfort and stability to the chaotic forces of creation. Themis personified divine law and proper custom, her stern but just demeanour establishing the principles that would govern divine and mortal behaviour. Mnemosyne represented memory itself, her consciousness serving as the repository for all events and knowledge that would accumulate throughout cosmic history. Her appearance was that of a woman of middle years whose eyes held depths that seemed to contain infinite experiences. Phoebe glowed with the silver light of the moon, her form elegant and ethereal, crowned with a crescent that waxed and waned according to cosmic rhythms. Tethys flowed as the feminine aspect of the world's waters, her form constantly shifting between that of a beautiful woman and pure liquid that nourished all life. These 12 Titans established themselves as the ruling generation of the cosmos, each claiming dominion over specific aspects of creation, while collectively maintaining the balance between their parents' opposing forces. Their interactions created the complex web of relationships that would define the structure of reality for eons to come. Yet Gaia and Uranus produced children beyond the Titans, beings whose nature was far more specialized and whose appearances reflected their singular purposes. The 3 Cyclops emerged as master craftsmen whose skills would prove essential to later divine conflicts. Bronter, whose name meant thunder, possessed a single eye in the center of his forehead that blazed with electrical energy. His massive frame, easily 3 times the height of a mortal man, rippled with muscles developed through countless hours at the cosmic forge. His hands, though enormous, possessed a delicacy that allowed him to craft items of incredible precision and power. Steropes, the lightning bringer, stood equally tall but with a leaner build that suggested speed and agility. His single eye glowed with a white-hot intensity that could blind mortals who dared to look directly at it. When he worked, sparks flew from his fingertips, and the air around him crackled with electrical energy that made his hair stand on end like a crown of silver wire. Argus, the bright one, completed the trio with an eye that shone like a miniature sun. His presence illuminated even the deepest caverns, and his voice carried the rumble of distant thunder that announced approaching storms. The three Hekatonchires represented raw power on a scale that dwarfed even the Titans. Cottus, Briareus and Gyges each possessed 50 heads and 100 arms, their forms so massive that they could stride across mountain ranges in single steps. Their multiple heads allowed them to maintain awareness in all directions simultaneously, while their 100 arms could perform countless tasks at once or deliver devastating attacks that no single opponent could hope to counter. Cottus appeared as the most contemplative of the three, his 50 faces often showing different expressions as he pondered various aspects of existence simultaneously. His 100 arms moved in perfect coordination, creating patterns of motion that seemed almost like a cosmic dance. Briareus embodied pure aggression, his faces typically showing expressions of rage or determination, while his arms constantly flexed and moved as if preparing for battle. The sound of his breathing resembled the roar of avalanches, and his footsteps could trigger earthquakes across entire regions. Gyges combined elements of his brother's personalities, showing both thoughtfulness and fierce determination. His multiple faces often engaged in silent conversations with each other, creating an internal dialogue that helped him process the complex nature of existence. When all three Hekatonchires moved together, their combined presence could reshape landscapes and alter the very foundations of the earth. These extraordinary beings represented the raw creative power of the union between earth and sky, but their very existence created a problem that would have far-reaching consequences. Uranus, upon seeing his monstrous children, was filled with disgust and fear. The Cyclops and Hekatonchires were too powerful, too alien, too potentially threatening to the cosmic order he envisioned. Their strength rivaled his own, and their loyalty remained questionable. Driven by revulsion and mounting paranoia about his most powerful offspring, Uranus made a decision that would ultimately seal his own fate. Each time Gaia gave birth to one of the Cyclops or Hekatonchires, he would immediately seize the newborn and thrust it back into her womb, imprisoning these mighty beings within the depths of the earth itself. The pain this caused Gaia was beyond description, not merely physical agony, but the spiritual torment of a mother forced to contain her children within her own body indefinitely. The Cyclops and Hekatonchires remained conscious during the imprisonment, their immense strength and rage building with each passing eon as they struggled against their earthen prison. This brutal treatment of her children filled Gaia with a fury that shook the very foundations of creation. The earth trembled with her anger, causing mountains to crack and valleys to split open. Her maternal instincts, combined with her primordial power, demanded justice for this unnatural cruelty. Yet Uranus was her equal in cosmic strength, and she could not confront him directly. Instead, she began to plot his downfall, turning her attention to the Titans who still roamed free across the world. Gaia approached each of her Titan sons individually, presenting them with her plan for revenge against their father. She spoke of Uranus's tyranny, his willingness to imprison his own children out of fear, and the danger this posed to all of them. Most of the Titans recoiled from the idea of patricide, their respect for the cosmic order preventing them from contemplating such a fundamental violation of natural law. Oceanus, the eldest, refused outright, arguing that challenging Uranus would bring chaos to the carefully balanced cosmos. Coeus and Creus similarly declined, as did Hyperion and Iapetus, each finding different reasons to avoid participating in their mother's scheme. Only Cronus, the youngest of the Titan males, possessed both the courage and the ruthless ambition necessary for such an undertaking. His understanding of time's cyclical nature had shown him that all periods of rule eventually come to an end, and he reasoned that Uranus's reign had grown stagnant and oppressive. Unlike his brothers, Cronus felt no particular loyalty to his father, viewing Uranus's treatment of the Cyclops and Hecatonchires as evidence of weakness rather than strength. A true ruler, Cronus believed, would find ways to control such powerful subjects rather than simply hiding them away. Recognizing her youngest son's willingness to act, Gaia retreated deep into her earthly depths and began crafting a weapon specifically designed to harm a primordial deity. Working with materials from the very core of creation, she forged an adamantine sickle whose blade could cut through divine flesh as easily as mortal steel sliced through grain. Adamantine, the hardest substance in existence, had never before been shaped into a weapon, and the process required Gaia to sacrifice a portion of her own essence to complete the forging. The resulting sickle gleamed with an inner light that seemed to absorb surrounding illumination, creating an aura of absolute darkness around its edge. When Gaia presented the weapon to Cronus, he immediately understood its significance. The sickle felt perfectly balanced in his hands, its weight distributed in a way that made it seem like a natural extension of his arm. The adamantine blade hummed with barely contained power, and Cronus could sense that it would never dull or break, no matter what it was used to cut. This was not merely a tool, but an instrument of cosmic change, capable of severing the bonds that held the current order in place. The plan Gaia devised was both simple and terrible in its implications. Each night Uranus descended from his position in the heavens to embrace Gaia across her entire surface, his attention focused entirely on their cosmic union. During these moments of intimacy, he was vulnerable in ways that never occurred during his daytime vigilance over the world. Cronus would hide in a predetermined location, waiting for the perfect moment when his father was completely distracted, then strike with the adamantine sickle before Uranus could react or defend himself. On the appointed night, Cronus concealed himself in a grove of ancient trees that grew at one of the traditional sites where Uranus would first touch the earth during his descent. The darkness was complete, with even the stars seeming dimmer than usual, as if the cosmos itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the coming violence. When Uranus began his mighty descent, his vast form blotting out the entire sky, Cronus gripped the sickle tighter and prepared to commit an act that would forever change the nature of divine rule. The moment of contact came with a sound like distant thunder as Uranus's celestial form pressed against Gaia's surface. In his passion and focus on their union, the sky god was completely unaware of his son's presence nearby. Cronus emerged from his hiding place with the fluid motion of a practiced warrior, the adamantine sickle gleaming in his hands as he approached his father's vulnerable form. Without hesitation or mercy, he swung the divine blade in a precise arc that severed Uranus's genitals from his body in a single, devastating cut. The scream that Uranus released as the adamantine blade bit into his divine flesh echoed across the entire cosmos, a sound of agony and shock that caused mountains to crumble and seas to boil. His blood, golden ichor that glowed with celestial light, splattered across the earth in a pattern that would have lasting consequences for the world. Where the largest drops fell, they soaked into Gaia's soil and immediately began generating new forms of life that had never existed before. From these blood-soaked patches of earth emerged the Erinyes, 3 terrifying goddesses whose sole purpose was to pursue and punish those who committed crimes against family bonds. Alecto, Megaera, and Tisiphone rose from the ichor-drenched ground with forms that reflected their grim function. The hair writhed with living serpents that hissed and snapped at the air around them, while their eyes glowed with a red light that could drive mortals to madness. Their bodies, though female in shape, possessed a terrible strength that allowed them to pursue wrongdoers across any distance and through any obstacle. Bronze wings sprouted from their shoulders, enabling them to fly at speeds that outpaced even the swiftest divine messengers. The same divine blood also gave birth to the Meliae, ash tree nymphs who would serve as the mothers of the Bronze Age race of humans. These beings possessed a more gentle nature than the Erinyes, but their connection to Uranus's spilled ichor granted them an inherent understanding of violence and warfare that they would pass on to their human descendants. Their forms were tall and graceful, with skin that had the smooth texture of ash bark and hair that rustled like leaves in the wind. Most significantly, the severed genitals of Uranus did not simply fall to earth but were cast by Cronus into the sea, where they began a transformation that would eventually produce one of the most important goddesses in the Greek pantheon. As they sank beneath the waves, the divine flesh began to foam and bubble, creating a white froth that spread across the water's surface. This foam possessed a creative power that rivaled the original union between Gaia and Uranus, and from it would eventually emerge Aphrodite, though her birth would not occur until much later in cosmic history. With his father's castration complete, Cronus assumed dominion over the cosmos, beginning what would later be known as the Golden Age of Titan rule. His first act as the new cosmic sovereign was to free his imprisoned siblings, the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, from their earthen prison within Gaia's depths. This liberation required tremendous effort, as Uranus's original binding had been reinforced by cosmic forces that resisted any attempt at release. Cronus had to channel his newfound authority over time itself to weaken these bonds sufficiently for his siblings to break free. When the Cyclops finally emerged from their long imprisonment, their gratitude toward Cronus seemed boundless. Brontes, Steropes and Arges had spent eons planning their revenge against Uranus, and they viewed their younger brother as the instrument of cosmic justice. Their first act of freedom was to forge gifts for Cronus that would help him maintain his new position as ruler of the universe. Working with divine metals that had never been used before, they created a crown that would enhance his temporal powers and a throne that would serve as the seat of cosmic authority. The Hecatonchires, equally grateful for their liberation, pledged their immense strength to Cronus's service. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges had emerged from their imprisonment even more powerful than before, their rage and frustration having been transformed into pure physical might during their long captivity. Their 100 arms could reshape landscapes in moments, while their 50 heads provided strategic thinking capabilities that rivaled the wisest of the Titans. With these mighty allies supporting his rule, Cronus seemed invincible. However, the cosmic order demanded balance, and Cronus's violent ascension to power had created ripples that would eventually return to threaten his own position. Shortly after establishing his reign, he received a prophecy from Gaia herself, the same mother who had helped him overthrow Uranus. The prophecy was simple but terrifying in its implications. Just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too would one of his own sons eventually overthrow him. The cycle of patricide would continue, and Cronus's rule would end at the hands of his own offspring. This revelation filled Cronus with the same paranoid fear that had once consumed Uranus. Unlike his father, however, Cronus was unwilling to simply imprison his children or prevent their birth entirely. Instead, he devised what he believed to be a more elegant solution to the prophetic threat. He would allow his children to be born, but immediately upon their birth he would swallow them whole, keeping them alive within his stomach where they could pose no threat to his authority, while remaining part of his own divine essence. Cronus's wife, Rhea, his sister among the Titans, initially accepted this arrangement as a necessary evil to preserve cosmic stability. Their first child, Hestia, was born as a beautiful goddess whose nature embodied the warmth and security of the hearth. The moment Rhea placed the newborn in Cronus's arms, he opened his massive jaws and swallowed her completely, ignoring Rhea's cries of anguish. Hestia disappeared into her father's gullet, conscious and aware but trapped within the confines of his divine stomach. The pattern continued with each subsequent birth. Demeter, goddess of the harvest and growing grain, suffered the same fate as her older sister. Her connection to agricultural abundance meant nothing to Cronus, who saw only a potential threat to his throne. Hera, whose regal bearing and natural authority were apparent even in infancy, joined her sisters in their father's stomach. Hades, born with an affinity for the darker aspects of existence, and Poseidon, whose infant cries carried the sound of crashing waves, both met the same terrible end. With each child he devoured, Cronus felt his power growing stronger as their divine essences merged with his own. He convinced himself that this was the natural order, that a ruler should contain all potential challenges within himself rather than allowing them to develop independently. Rhea's growing horror and desperation meant little to him compared to the security of his throne. When Rhea became pregnant for the 6th time, her maternal instincts finally overcame her loyalty to her husband. She could no longer bear to watch another of her children disappear into Cronus's maw, and she began secretly planning to save this child from the fate that had befallen his siblings. Working in coordination with Gaia, who had grown disgusted with Cronus's paranoid tyranny, Rhea prepared to deceive her husband through a substitution that would require precise timing and absolute secrecy. As her pregnancy neared its end, Rhea travelled to the island of Crete, far from Cronus's usual haunts and hidden among the island's numerous caves and mountainous terrain. In a deep cavern on Mount Dicta, she gave birth to Zeus, a son whose divine power was immediately apparent even in his infant form. Lightning flickered around his tiny fingers, and his cries carried the rumble of distant thunder that echoed through this cave system. Rhea knew she had only a short time before Cronus would expect her to present their new child for his consumption. Working quickly, she found a large stone that approximated the size and weight of a newborn god, then wrapped it carefully in swaddling clothes that would conceal its true nature. The deception had to be perfect. Cronus's paranoia had made him suspicious of any deviation from their established routine. When Rhea returned to her husband carrying the swaddled stone, Cronus was waiting with the same terrible eagerness he had shown for each of their previous children. Without examining the bundle closely or showing any paternal affection, he immediately seized what he believed to be his son and swallowed it whole. The stone passed down his throat and settled in his stomach, alongside his 5 imprisoned children, while Zeus remained safely hidden in the Cretan cave. To ensure the infant's safety and proper development, Rhea arranged for his care to be handled by beings who could be trusted to maintain absolute secrecy. The nymphs Adrastea and Ida became his primary caretakers, providing him with divine nourishment and protection from any of Cronus's agents who might discover his existence. The goat Amalthea supplied milk that was perfectly suited to nourishing a young god, while her horn would later become the legendary cornucopia, a symbol of abundance and divine providence. Most importantly, Rhea enlisted the aid of the Curetes, warrior priests whose ritual dances and loud bronze weapons could mask any sounds that might betray Zeus's presence. Whenever the infant god cried or laughed, the Curetes would begin their frenzied dancing, clashing their shields and spears together in rhythms that echoed through the mountains and concealed Zeus's voice from any divine ears that might be listening. Their dedication to this task was absolute, understanding that the future of the cosmos might depend on their success in keeping Zeus hidden. As Zeus grew from infant to child to young adult, his power developed at an extraordinary rate. The lightning that had flickered around his baby fingers became controlled bolts that he could direct with precision. His voice gained the authority to command storms, while his physical strength grew to rival that of the mightiest titans. More importantly, his intelligence and strategic thinking capabilities developed alongside his raw power, giving him insights into cosmic politics and warfare that would prove crucial in the conflicts to come. During his hidden maturation on Crete, Zeus learned the full truth about his father's tyranny and the fate of his siblings. The knowledge that 5 of his brothers and sisters remained trapped within Cronus's stomach filled him with a righteous anger that burned like the lightning he commanded. Unlike previous generations of divine offspring, Zeus felt no conflicted loyalty toward his father. Cronus had forfeited any claim to filial respect through his monstrous behavior. When Zeus reached full maturity, he began planning his return to the wider cosmos and his confrontation with Cronus. His first step was to seek out allies who shared his opposition to Titan rule. The Titaness Metis, whose name meant wisdom or cunning, became his most important early supporter. Her intelligence rivaled Zeus's own, and she possessed knowledge of herbs and potions that could affect even divine physiology. Together, they devised a plan to liberate Zeus's siblings from their imprisonment within Cronus's stomach. Metis prepared a powerful emetic that would force Cronus to vomit up everything he'd swallowed, while Zeus prepared to present himself to his father in the guise of a loyal son seeking to serve in his court. The deception required Zeus to suppress his natural authority and present himself as subservient, a role that went against every instinct in his divine nature. However, his strategic mind recognized that surprise was essential for their plan's success. When Zeus finally appeared before Cronus, claiming to be a young Titan seeking a position in the cosmic hierarchy, his father's paranoia had grown so extreme that he suspected nothing. The idea that his prophesied nemesis could be standing directly before him seemed impossible, and Zeus's carefully crafted humble demeanour convinced Cronus that this was simply another minor deity seeking advancement. Accepting Zeus into his court as a cupbearer, Cronus unknowingly placed his greatest enemy in the perfect position to strike. At the first opportunity, Zeus mixed Metis's emetic into Cronus's wine, ensuring that the potion was thoroughly dissolved and undetectable. When Cronus drank deeply from the cup, praising Zeus for his excellent service, he was unknowingly consuming the instrument of his own downfall. The effects of the divine emetic were swift and violent. Within moments, Cronus was racked with convulsions that forced him to regurgitate everything in his stomach. First came the stone that Rhea had substituted for Zeus, emerging covered in digestive fluids, but otherwise unchanged by its long residence in Cronus's belly. Then, in reverse order of their consumption, came Zeus's siblings, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and finally Hestia. Each emerged fully grown and possessed of their complete divine powers, their time within their father's stomach having allowed them to mature without aging. Their fury at their imprisonment was matched only by their gratitude towards Zeus for engineering their liberation. The reunion of the 6 siblings marked the beginning of a new phase in cosmic history. Unlike previous generations of gods who had been content to accept the existing order, these young deities possessed both the power and the determination to reshape the universe according to their own vision. Zeus's natural leadership abilities were immediately apparent to his siblings, who recognized him as their deliverer and readily accepted his authority in planning their next moves. However, Cronus's defeat and the liberation of the swallowed gods did not immediately end Titan rule. The older generation of deities still controlled most of the cosmic infrastructure, and many of them remained loyal to Cronus despite his increasingly erratic behaviour. The conflict that would determine the future structure of divine authority was about to begin, a war that would rage for 10 full years and involve forces that had never before been unleashed in cosmic combat. The Titanomachy, as this great war would come to be known, began not with a single decisive battle but with a gradual escalation of tensions between the older and younger generations of gods. Zeus and his siblings established their base of operations on Mount Olympus, a peak that had previously been considered neutral territory, but whose strategic position made it ideal for coordinating military operations. From this elevated position, they could observe Titan movements across the world while remaining relatively secure from surprise attacks. The establishment of Zeus's dominion over the cosmos following the Titanomachy required more than military victory. It demanded the creation of an entirely new system of divine governance that could maintain order while preventing the cycles of patricide that had plagued previous generations. Unlike his predecessors who had ruled through fear and suppression, Zeus recognized that lasting authority required the willing cooperation of other powerful deities, each granted specific spheres of influence that would satisfy their ambitions while serving the greater cosmic order. The division of the universe among the three brothers who had led the rebellion against the Titans became the foundation of this new system. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to determine their respective domains, though the process was far from random. Zeus's control over the sky and his role as king of the gods reflected both his leadership during the war and his natural affinity for the celestial realm from which he drew his lightning-based powers. His domain encompassed not merely the physical heavens, but also the abstract concepts of divine law, justice, and cosmic order that would govern all other deities. Poseidon's claim to the seas satisfied his tempestuous nature and provided him with a realm vast enough to match his enormous ego. The ocean domain included not only the surface waters that mortals could observe, but also the deep currents that circulated through underground caverns and the springs that brought fresh water to the land. His authority extended to all creatures that dwelt within aquatic environments, from the smallest fish to the great sea monsters that lurked in the deepest trenches. The god's palace beneath the waves was constructed from coral and precious stones, its halls filled with the constant sound of moving water that reflected his restless personality. Hades received the underworld, a realm that many considered the least desirable of the three major domains, but which actually provided him with unique advantages. His kingdom encompassed not only the spirits of the dead, but also the vast mineral wealth that lay buried within the earth's depths. The precious metals and gems that mortals valued so highly all fell under his jurisdiction, making him potentially the wealthiest of all the gods. His realm stretched far beyond the simple concept of a land of the dead, including multiple regions designed for different categories of souls and elaborate administrative systems for managing the constant influx of deceased mortals. The earth itself remained neutral territory, shared among all the gods but claimed exclusively by none. This arrangement prevented any single deity from accumulating too much power, while ensuring that mortal affairs would be influenced by multiple divine perspectives. The decision reflected Zeus's political wisdom. By making the mortal world a shared responsibility, he created a system of checks and balances that would discourage any individual god from attempting to overthrow the established order. With the fundamental structure of divine authority established, Zeus began assembling the council of 12 principal Olympian deities, who would serve as his primary advisors and administrators. This group, known as the Dodecatheon, represented the most important aspects of cosmic governance and divine influence over mortal affairs. Each member possessed specific areas of expertise and responsibility, creating a comprehensive system for managing the complex interactions between gods and humans. Hera, Zeus's sister and wife, assumed the role of queen of the gods and protector of marriage and family relationships. Her position was both powerful and frustrating. While she possessed tremendous authority and commanded respect from all other deities, her marriage to Zeus was perpetually troubled by his numerous infidelities. Hera's appearance reflected her royal status, with a tall, imposing figure that radiated dignity and authority. Her dark hair was typically arranged in elaborate styles befitting her position, while her clothing consisted of rich fabrics in royal colours that emphasized her status as queen. Her eyes, often described as having the watchful quality of a cow, possessed an intelligence that missed nothing and a capacity for jealous rage that made her one of the most feared deities in the pantheon. The goddess's primary symbols included the peacock, whose magnificent tail feathers represented the all-seeing nature of her vigilance over marriage vows, and the pomegranate, which symbolized the fertility and abundance that proper marriages should produce. Her sacred animals also included the cow, reflecting both her nurturing aspects and her connection to domestic prosperity. Hera's temples were among the most magnificent structures in the ancient world, designed to reflect both her divine authority and her role as protector of civilized society. Athena emerged from Zeus's head fully grown and armed, her birth representing the perfect fusion of wisdom and warfare that would define her character throughout Greek mythology. Unlike other war deities who revelled in the chaos and destruction of battle, Athena embodied strategic thinking and defensive combat designed to protect civilization rather than destroy it. Her appearance combined feminine beauty with martial prowess. She was tall and athletic, with grey eyes that seemed to analyse everything they observed, and auburn hair that was usually concealed beneath her distinctive helmet. The goddess's armour was crafted by the Cyclops specifically for her unique role, featuring a breastplate adorned with the head of the Gorgon Medusa and a shield that could deflect any weapon while inspiring terror in her enemies. Her spear never missed its target and could pierce any armour, while her helmet rendered her invisible when she chose to observe mortal affairs without interference. Athena's owl, a symbol of wisdom and night vision, often perched on her shoulder serving as both companion and messenger. Apollo, the son of Zeus and the Titaness Leto, embodied multiple aspects of civilization and culture that made him one of the most complex figures in the Olympian pantheon. His domain included music, poetry, prophecy, healing, and the sun's daily journey across the sky. Apollo's appearance epitomized the Greek ideal of male beauty. He was tall and perfectly proportioned, with golden hair that seemed to glow within a light and features so harmonious that mortals often found themselves unable to look away from his face. The god's primary symbol was the lyre, an instrument he had crafted himself and whose music could calm savage beasts, inspire artistic creation, or drive listeners to ecstatic frenzy depending on his intentions. His silver bow, forged by the Cyclops, could shoot arrows of both plague and healing across vast distances with perfect accuracy. Apollo's chariot, pulled by 4 magnificent horses with manes of flame, carried the sun across the sky each day, bringing light and warmth to the mortal world, while allowing him to observe all human activities from his elevated position. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister, chose to remain eternally virgin and devoted herself to the hunt and the protection of wild animals. Her domain encompassed not only the chase, but also childbirth and the protection of young creatures, creating an apparent contradiction that reflected the complex nature of wilderness itself. Artemis appeared as a young woman of athletic build, her muscles developed through constant hunting and her skin bronzed by exposure to outdoor elements. Her dark hair was typically braided in practical styles that would not interfere with her hunting activities, while her clothing consisted of short tunics that allowed for maximum freedom of movement. The goddess's silver bow, a gift from the Cyclopes that matched her brother's golden weapon, could shoot arrows that brought either swift death or protection to their targets. Her pack of hunting hounds, each the size of a small horse, accompanied her on her expeditions and were capable of tracking any quarry across any terrain. Artemis's chariot was pulled by 4 golden-horned deer that could run across the surface of water and through the air with equal ease, allowing her to pursue prey or flee danger regardless of the terrain involved. Aphrodite's birth from the foam created by Uranus's severed genitals gave her a unique position among the Olympian deities, as she predated Zeus's reign while still accepting his authority over the cosmic order. Her domain encompassed all forms of love, beauty and sexual desire, making her influence felt in every aspect of mortal and divine relationships. The goddess's appearance was the absolute pinnacle of feminine beauty, with features so perfect that even other deities found themselves affected by her presence. Her golden hair seemed to move with a life of its own, while her skin possessed a luminous quality that made her appear to glow from within. Aphrodite's magical girdle, woven with charms that could inspire love in any heart, was her most powerful tool for influencing both gods and mortals. Her dove-drawn chariot allowed her to travel swiftly between the divine and mortal realms, spreading her influence wherever relationships needed her intervention. The goddess's sacred flowers included roses and myrtles, both associated with romantic love and physical beauty, while her connection to the sea through her birth made shells and pearls important symbols of her divine nature. Ares, the son of Zeus and Hera, embodied the brutal and chaotic aspects of warfare that complemented Athena's more strategic approach to combat. While his sister focused on defensive tactics and civilized conflict, Ares revelled in the bloodshed and violence that characterized battles fought without restraint or higher purpose. His appearance reflected his violent nature. He was massively built, with muscles that bulged from constant combat training and scars that marked his body like a map of every battle he'd fought. The god's armour was designed for maximum intimidation, rather than practical protection, featuring spikes and aggressive angles that made him appear even more threatening than his natural size suggested. His spear and shield bore the stains of countless battles, while his helmet was crowned with plumes that resembled flames dancing in the wind. Ares' chariot was pulled by 4 horses whose eyes glowed red with bloodlust and whose hooves struck sparks from the ground as they galloped towards battle. Hephaestus, despite being the son of Zeus and Hera, bore little physical resemblance to his divine parents due to his congenital lameness and the injuries he had sustained during his traumatic birth and subsequent fall from Olympus. His appearance was that of a powerfully built man whose upper body had been developed to compensate for his damaged legs, with arms and shoulders that possessed strength rivaling that of the Cyclopes themselves. His face, while not conventionally handsome, bore an expression of intelligence and creativity that reflected his role as the divine craftsman. The god's workshop, located within the volcanic Mount Etna, contained forges that burned with fires hot enough to melt divine metals and tools that could shape materials no mortal smith could even touch. His creations included not only weapons and armour for the gods, but also mechanical servants made of gold who could perform complex tasks with perfect precision. Hephaestus's hammer, forged from meteoric iron, could shape any substance into any desired form, while his tongs could handle materials that would destroy lesser tools. Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and the harvest, possessed authority over all aspects of plant growth and food production that sustained mortal civilization. Her appearance reflected the seasonal cycles that governed her domain. During spring and summer, she appeared as a mature woman in her prime, with rich brown hair crowned with grain stalks and clothing that emphasized her connection to abundance and fertility. During autumn and winter, her appearance became more austere, reflecting the dormant period when the earth rested between growing seasons. The goddess's primary symbols included sheaves of wheat, cornucopias overflowing with fruits and vegetables, and the scythe used to harvest grain at the end of the growing season. Her sacred animals included pigs, which were associated with fertility and abundance, and serpents, which represented the Earth's hidden powers of regeneration. Demeter's temples often included extensive gardens where priests and priestesses could demonstrate proper agricultural techniques to mortal farmers seeking her blessing. Dionysus, the youngest member of the Olympian Council, brought a revolutionary energy to the divine hierarchy that both enriched and complicated the established order. Born from Zeus's thigh after his mother Semele's death, Dionysus embodied the transformative power of wine, ecstasy, and religious experience that could either elevate mortals to divine heights or destroy them completely. His appearance was deliberately ambiguous, sometimes manifesting as a beautiful young man with feminine features and sometimes as a mature bearded figure whose eyes held the wisdom of someone who had experienced every pleasure and pain existence could offer. The god's primary symbols included grapevines heavy with fruit, the Theseus staff topped with pine cones that his followers carried during religious celebrations, and the leopard whose spotted coat represented the dappled light filtering through grape arbours. His retinue included satyrs, maenads, and other creatures associated with wild celebration and the abandonment of social restraints. Dionysus's chariot was pulled by panthers whose sleek forms moved with the fluid grace of the dancers, while his clothing consisted of flowing robes that seemed to change colour and texture according to his mood. Hermes, the son of Zeus and the nymph Maia, served as the messenger of the gods and the guide for souls travelling between the divine and mortal realms. His responsibilities included not only communication between deities, but also commerce, travel, and the protection of boundaries that separated different spheres of existence. Hermes appeared as a young man of medium height, whose athletic build suggested both speed and endurance, with features that were pleasant rather than striking, and an expression that hinted at the intelligence and mischief in equal measure. The god's winged sandals, a gift from Zeus, allowed him to fly at speeds that surpassed even the swiftest birds, while his caduceus staff could open any lock and compel truth from even the most reluctant speakers. His traveller's hat and cloak could render him invisible when necessary, enabling him to observe mortal affairs without interference, or to carry out diplomatic missions that required discretion. Hermes' sacred animals included rams, whose horns symbolized his connection to trade and prosperity, and roosters, whose crow announced the dawn and the beginning of new journeys. The complex web of relationships among the Olympian deities created a dynamic system of alliances, rivalries, and romantic entanglements that influenced every aspect of divine governance. Zeus's position as king of the gods was secure due to his superior power and political acumen, but his authority was constantly tested by the conflicting interests and ambitions of his fellow Olympians. His numerous extramarital affairs created ongoing tensions with Hera, while producing additional divine offspring who would eventually claim their own positions within the cosmic hierarchy. The king of the gods' infidelities were legendary in both scope and consequence, as his romantic interest extended far beyond the divine realm to include mortal women, nymphs, and even male companions who caught his attention. These relationships were not merely personal indulgences, but often served larger cosmic purposes, producing heroic offspring who would play crucial roles in maintaining the balance between divine and mortal worlds. However, Zeus's inability to control his desires created constant diplomatic crises within the Olympian court, and provided his enemies with opportunities to exploit the divisions within the ruling pantheon. Hera's responses to her husband's infidelities became legendary for their creativity and ruthless efficiency. Rather than confronting Zeus directly, which would have been both futile and dangerous, the Queen of the Gods typically directed her vengeance toward his lovers and their children. Her punishments were carefully crafted to fit the specific circumstances of each offence, often involving transformations, curses, or elaborate schemes that could span decades or even centuries before reaching their conclusion. The establishment of divine law under Zeus's reign represented a fundamental shift from the arbitrary rule that had characterized previous cosmic orders. Unlike Cronus, who had governed through fear and suppression, or Uranus, who had simply imposed his will without consideration for consequences, Zeus created a system of justice that applied consistent principles across all levels of existence. The concept of hubris, excessive pride or arrogance that challenged the natural order, became central to this new legal framework, providing a mechanism for punishing those who overstepped their proper boundaries while rewarding those who accepted their designated roles. Divine justice under the Olympian system operated according to principles that balanced punishment with the possibility of redemption, creating opportunities for both gods and mortals to learn from their mistakes, rather than simply suffering eternal consequences for single acts of defiance. This approach reflected Zeus's understanding that lasting authority required the consent of the governed, even when that consent was obtained through the demonstration of overwhelming power rather than voluntary agreement. The interactions between the Olympian gods and mortal humans established patterns that would define Greek religious practice for centuries to come. Unlike the distant, incomprehensible deities of earlier cosmic orders, the Olympians took active interest in human affairs and regularly intervened in mortal conflicts, love affairs, and political disputes. These interventions were not random acts of divine caprice, but reflected the gods' ongoing need to maintain their authority and influence in a world where mortal civilizations were becoming increasingly sophisticated and potentially challenging to divine rule. The divine hierarchy established by Zeus required more than political arrangements among the gods. It demanded the creation of mortal beings who could serve as subjects, worshippers, and intermediaries between the celestial realm and the physical world. The task of creating humanity fell primarily to Prometheus, a titan whose name meant forethought and whose intellectual capabilities rivaled those of the Olympians themselves. Unlike many of his Titan relatives who had opposed Zeus during the Great War, Prometheus had recognized the inevitability of Olympian victory and allied himself with the younger generation of gods, earning a position of trust and responsibility in the new cosmic order. Prometheus approached the creation of humanity with the same methodical precision that characterized all his endeavors, working with clay drawn from the banks of rivers that flowed down from Mount Olympus. He began shaping forms that would combine the physical durability necessary for survival in the mortal world with the intellectual capacity needed to comprehend divine will and offer proper worship to their celestial rulers. The clay he selected possessed unique properties. It had been enriched by runoff from the sacred mountain and contained traces of divine essence that would allow his creations to bridge the gap between purely physical existence and spiritual awareness. The process of human creation required multiple stages, each carefully planned to produce beings who would serve their intended purpose without becoming threats to divine authority. Prometheus first moulded the basic physical forms, creating bodies that resemble the gods in general appearance but lacked their supernatural size, strength, and immortality. These clay figures possessed the upright posture that distinguished rational beings from mere animals, hands capable of crafting tools and creating art, and faces that could express the complex emotions necessary for meaningful relationships with both fellow mortals and divine beings. Once the physical forms were complete, Prometheus faced the more challenging task of animating his creations with life force that would enable independent thought and action. This process required him to breathe a portion of his own divine essence into each clay figure, sacrificing some of his immortal power to grant consciousness to beings who would otherwise remain lifeless sculptures. The animation process was exhausting work that left Prometheus weakened but satisfied with the results. His human creations possessed intelligence, creativity, and the capacity for moral reasoning that would make them suitable subjects for divine rule. The newly created humans possessed remarkable adaptability and learning capacity, quickly developing language, social structures, and primitive technologies that allowed them to survive in environments that would have destroyed less versatile creatures. However, Prometheus soon realized that his creations faced a fundamental disadvantage that threatened their long-term survival. Unlike other animals that possessed natural defenses such as claws, fangs, thick hides, or superior speed, humans were physically vulnerable and lacked the instinctive knowledge needed to thrive in a world filled with dangerous predators and harsh environmental conditions. More critically, humans lacked fire, the transformative element that would enable them to cook food, forge tools, provide warmth during cold seasons, and develop the advanced technologies necessary for building lasting civilizations. Fire belonged exclusively to the gods, who guarded it jealously as one of the primary symbols of divine power and the key to controlling the natural world. Zeus had specifically forbidden the sharing of fire with mortals, viewing it as too dangerous a tool to place in the hands of beings whose loyalty and wisdom remained untested. Prometheus watched his human creations struggling to survive in their primitive state and felt growing concern for their welfare. His intellectual nature compelled him to seek solutions to problems, and the suffering of humanity represented a challenge that demanded his intervention. The Titan's attachment to his creations went beyond simple pride in his craftsmanship. He had invested a portion of his own divine essence in their animation, creating a connection that made their struggles feel like personal failures on his part. The decision to steal fire from the gods required careful planning and absolute secrecy, as discovery would result in punishment severe enough to serve as an example to any other deities who might consider defying Zeus's explicit commands. Prometheus studied the routines of the Olympian court, identifying opportunities when the divine fire could be accessed without immediate detection. His plan centered on the forge of Hephaestus, where the sacred flame burned continuously to power the god's metalworking operations, and where a small portion could be removed without being immediately missed. Concealing a hollow fennel stalk within his robes, Prometheus waited for an opportunity when Hephaestus was absent from his workshop and the divine fire burned unattended. The fennel stalk was specifically chosen for its properties. The plant's hollow interior could contain glowing coals, while its outer surface remained cool enough to handle safely, and its natural appearance would not arouse suspicion if observed by other deities. When the moment arrived, Prometheus quickly inserted the stalk into the divine flame, capturing a portion of the sacred fire within the plant's hollow core. The theft itself took only moments to accomplish, but the consequences would reshape the relationship between gods and mortals for all subsequent history. Prometheus carried the stolen fire down from Mount Olympus to the human settlements scattered across the Earth's surface, presenting his gift to the mortals he had created and teaching them how to maintain and use the divine flame for their benefit. The humans' reaction to receiving fire was immediate and transformative. They quickly learned to cook their food, making it more digestible and nutritious, to forge metal tools that were superior to their previous stone implements, and to create light that extended their productive hours beyond the limitations of daylight. The introduction of fire accelerated human development at a pace that surprised even Prometheus. Within a few generations, his creations had established permanent settlements, developed agriculture, created art and music, and begun constructing temples where they offered worship to the gods who ruled over their world. Fire had become the catalyst for civilization itself, transforming scattered groups of primitive humans into organized societies capable of impressive achievements in technology, culture, and spiritual understanding. Zeus's discovery of the fire theft came through reports from other gods who had observed the sudden advancement of human civilization and the presence of divine flame in mortal settlements. The king of the gods' reaction combined fury at the direct violation of his explicit command with concern about the long-term implications of giving humans access to divine power. Fire was not merely a useful tool, but a fundamental force of transformation that could potentially enable mortals to challenge divine authority if they learned to harness its full potential. The punishment Zeus devised for Prometheus was calculated to serve multiple purposes. It would satisfy the king's desire for revenge, demonstrate the consequences of defying divine will, and provide ongoing suffering that would remind all observers of the price of rebellion against Olympian authority. Rather than simply destroying the Titan, which would have been a relatively merciful end, Zeus ordered that Prometheus be chained to a remote mountain peak in the Caucasus range, where he would experience eternal torment designed to match the magnitude of his offence. The chains that bound Prometheus were forged by Hephaestus himself, using adamantine links that could not be broken by any force less than Zeus's direct intervention. These bonds secured the Titan to the rocky peak in a position that prevented any movement or escape while leaving him fully conscious and aware of his surroundings. The location chosen for his punishment was deliberately isolated, far from any divine or mortal settlement that might provide comfort or companionship during his suffering. The most terrible aspect of Prometheus's punishment was the daily visit of an enormous eagle that would tear open his abdomen and devour his liver, while he remained conscious and able to feel every moment of the agony. The eagle's beak and talons were supernaturally sharp, capable of cutting through divine flesh that would have been impervious to mortal weapons, while its appetite for Titan liver seemed inexhaustible. Each night, Prometheus's immortal nature would regenerate the consumed organ, restoring him to full physical integrity, only to ensure that the next day's torment would be as excruciating as the first. This cycle of daily torture was designed to continue for eternity, creating suffering that would increase rather than diminish over time, as Prometheus's anticipation of each day's agony added psychological torment to the physical pain. The punishment served as a visible reminder to all divine beings of Zeus's power and his willingness to use extreme measures to maintain order within the cosmic hierarchy. However, Zeus's response to the fire theft extended beyond punishing Prometheus to addressing the broader problem of humanity's newfound capabilities and potential for future challenges to divine authority. The king of the gods recognized that simply retrieving the stolen fire would be impossible. Humans had already learned to create and maintain flames independently, and the knowledge of fire's uses had spread too widely to be effectively suppressed. Instead, Zeus decided to introduce a new element into human society that would create ongoing problems and limitations that would prevent mortals from becoming too powerful or too comfortable with their divine gifts. The solution Zeus devised involved the creation of the first woman, a being who would introduce complications and conflicts into human society that had previously consisted entirely of male individuals created by Prometheus. This first woman would be crafted by the gods themselves, incorporating both gifts and curses that would make her simultaneously attractive and dangerous to the existing human population. The project required the cooperation of multiple Olympian deities, each contributing specific attributes that would serve Zeus's larger purpose of limiting human potential while maintaining the appearance of divine benevolence. Hephaestus received the commission to create the physical form of this first woman, working with the same divine clay that Prometheus had used for his human creations, but incorporating additional elements that would make her appearance superior to any mortal female who might be born naturally. The god of the forge crafted a form of extraordinary beauty, with perfect proportions, flawless skin, and features that combined the most attractive characteristics of goddesses and mortal women. Her physical perfection was designed to ensure that human males would find her irresistibly attractive, guaranteeing her acceptance into human society despite her artificial origins. Athena contributed practical skills that would make the first woman useful as well as beautiful, teaching her to weave, spin, and create clothing that surpassed anything humans had previously produced. These domestic abilities would make her valuable to human society, while also establishing expectations for female roles that would influence gender relationships throughout subsequent history. The goddess of wisdom also provided the first woman with intelligence sufficient to navigate complex social situations, though this mental acuity was deliberately limited to prevent her from recognizing the true purpose of her creation. Aphrodite bestowed upon the first woman an enhanced capacity for inspiring love and desire, ensuring that her presence would create intense emotional reactions in human males. This gift was double-edged. While it guaranteed that she would be welcomed and cherished, it also introduced jealousy, competition, and romantic conflict into human society for the first time. The goddess of love's contribution included not only the ability to inspire passion, but also the knowledge of how to manipulate these emotions for personal advantage. Hermes provided the first woman with a complex personality that combined charm and cunning in ways that would prove both beneficial and harmful to human society. His gifts included persuasive speech that could convince others to act against their better judgment, curiosity that would drive her to explore forbidden knowledge, and a tendency toward deception that would create ongoing trust issues between genders. The messenger god also gave her the name Pandora, meaning all-gifted, which reflected the multiple divine contributions to her creation, while hinting at the comprehensive nature of the problems she would introduce. When Pandora's creation was complete, Zeus presented her to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother whose name meant afterthought, and whose intellectual capabilities were significantly inferior to those of his more famous sibling. Despite Prometheus's warnings about accepting any gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus was immediately captivated by Pandora's beauty and welcomed her into his household. The attraction was not merely physical. Pandora's divine craftsmanship had created a being who seemed to fulfill every desire for companionship and domestic partnership that Epimetheus had never realized he possessed. Along with Pandora, Zeus provided what appeared to be a wedding gift, a large ceramic jar sealed with elaborate divine locks and accompanied by strict instructions that it should never be opened under any circumstances. The jar's exterior was decorated with intricate patterns that hinted at the valuable contents within, while its weight and the care with which it was sealed suggested that it contained treasures of extraordinary worth. Zeus's presentation of this gift was accompanied by explanations that emphasized its importance while deliberately avoiding any detailed description of its actual contents. The presence of the sealed jar in Epimetheus's household created an ongoing source of temptation that grew stronger with each passing day. Pandora's divine curiosity, implanted by Hermes as part of her fundamental nature, made the mystery of the jar's contents increasingly irresistible. The elaborate locks and divine seals that protected the container only heightened her desire to discover what treasures might be hidden within, while Zeus's explicit prohibition against opening it added the thrill of forbidden knowledge to her growing obsession. Epimetheus, despite his brother's warnings about divine gifts, found himself unable to resist Pandora's repeated questions about the jar and her suggestions that surely a brief glimpse of its contents would cause no harm. His intellectual limitations made him susceptible to her persuasive arguments, while his emotional attachment to her made him reluctant to refuse her requests or impose strict restrictions on her behaviour. The combination of Pandora's divine persuasiveness and Epimetheus's natural weakness created a situation that Zeus had carefully orchestrated to achieve his desired outcome. The day when Pandora finally opened the jar marked a fundamental transformation in the human condition that would affect every subsequent generation of mortals. As soon as the divine seals were broken and the lid lifted, the contents that Zeus had carefully sealed within began pouring out into the world with unstoppable force. These were not treasures or gifts, but rather the abstract concepts of human suffering that had previously been unknown to Prometheus's original creations: disease, old age, hard labour, mental anguish, envy, hatred, and countless other forms of misery that would plague humanity for the remainder of their existence. The release of these evils was not a single dramatic event, but rather a continuous outpouring that spread across the entire world with supernatural speed. Wherever humans lived, the contents of Pandora's jar found them, introducing forms of suffering that their previous existence had never included. Disease began afflicting bodies that had previously known only health, while aging started the process of physical deterioration that would eventually lead to death. Mental anguish, jealousy, and hatred poisoned relationships that had previously been characterized by harmony and cooperation. In her panic at witnessing the consequences of her action, Pandora managed to reseal the jar before its contents were completely emptied, trapping one final element that Zeus had placed within. This remaining item was hope, the one positive force that would enable humans to endure the sufferings that had been unleashed upon them. The imprisonment of hope within the jar created a situation where humans would experience all the evils that had been released while having only limited access to the consolation that might make their suffering bearable. The introduction of evil into the world through Pandora's curiosity established patterns of human existence that would define the mortal condition throughout all subsequent history. Humans would now face challenges and sufferings that tested their endurance, wisdom, and moral character, creating opportunities for both heroic achievement and tragic failure. The presence of evil also made human worship of the gods more meaningful, as mortals would turn to divine protection and assistance in dealing with problems that exceeded their own capabilities to resolve. The transformation of human society following the opening of Pandora's jar coincided with the beginning of a new phase in the relationship between mortals and immortals. The gods now dealt with beings who possessed both the divine gift of fire and the burden of suffering, creating a complex dynamic that required ongoing divine intervention and guidance. This new relationship would be further complicated by the succession of different human ages, each characterized by distinct moral and social conditions that reflected the evolving nature of divine-mortal interactions. The first of these ages, known as the Golden Age, had actually preceded the creation of Pandora and represented the ideal condition of human existence under direct divine guidance. During this period, which coincided with the reign of Cronus before his overthrow by Zeus, humans lived in perfect harmony with both the natural world and the divine order. Death from old age, disease, or violence was unknown, while the earth provided abundant food without requiring human labour or agricultural techniques. The conclusion of divine conflicts and the establishment of Zeus's Olympian order created a unique period in cosmic history when gods and mortals interacted with unprecedented frequency and intensity. This era, known as the Heroic Age, witnessed the birth of extraordinary individuals whose divine parentage granted them capabilities far exceeding those of ordinary humans, while still leaving them subject to mortality and human limitations. These heroes served as bridges between the celestial and terrestrial realms, their adventures establishing patterns of heroic achievement that would influence Greek culture for millennia. Perseus emerged as one of the earliest and most archetypal heroes of this age, his story embodying the classic elements that would define heroic narratives throughout Greek mythology. Born to Danae, princess of Argos, and Zeus himself, who had visited her in the form of golden rain while she was imprisoned by her father King Acrisius, Perseus possessed divine heritage that manifested in exceptional courage, intelligence, and the favour of the gods. His mortal upbringing, however, ensured that he would face genuine dangers and challenges that could result in his death despite his supernatural advantages. The circumstances of Perseus's birth created immediate conflict with his grandfather Acrisius, who had received a prophecy that his daughter's son would eventually kill him. Rather than risk direct confrontation with Zeus's offspring, Acrisius sealed both Danae and the infant Perseus in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, hoping that the gods would interpret this as natural death rather than deliberate murder. The chest drifted across the Mediterranean until it reached the island of Seriphos, where the fisherman Dictys discovered the survivors and provided them with shelter and protection. Perseus grew to maturity on Seriphos under the care of Dictys and his wife, developing the physical strength and combat skills necessary for heroic achievement while remaining unaware of his true parentage and destiny. His divine heritage became apparent through his exceptional abilities in athletics, warfare, and leadership, though these talents initially seemed to bring more problems than benefits. King Polydectes of Seriphos became obsessed with marrying Danae, and viewed Perseus as an obstacle to his plans, leading him to devise a scheme that would remove the young hero from the island permanently. The challenge Polydectes presented to Perseus was ostensibly a wedding gift request. The king claimed he was marrying another woman and asked all the young men of the island to contribute horses as presents. Perseus, lacking the wealth to provide such an expensive gift, rashly boasted that he could obtain anything the king desired, even the head of the Gorgon Medusa. Polydectes immediately accepted this offer, knowing that the task was essentially impossible and would likely result in Perseus's death, clearing the way for his pursuit of Danae. The Gorgons represented one of the most terrifying threats in the ancient world, three sisters whose appearance had been transformed by divine curse into monstrous forms that could turn any living being to stone with a single glance. Medusa, the only mortal among the three, possessed serpents instead of hair, bronze wings that enabled flight, and eyes that blazed with a deadly power. Her sisters Stheno and Euryale were immortal, and even more dangerous, their supernatural strength and speed making them nearly invincible opponents for any mortal warrior. Perseus's quest to slay Medusa required divine assistance that reflected both his heroic status and the god's interest in maintaining the balance between mortal achievement and divine authority. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, became his primary patron, providing guidance and equipment specifically designed to overcome the unique challenges posed by the Gorgons. Her involvement was not merely charitable. The goddess had her own reasons for wanting Medusa destroyed, as the Gorgon had once been a beautiful priestess in Athena's temple, who had been violated by Poseidon and subsequently transformed as punishment for defiling the sacred space. The goddess presented Perseus with a polished bronze shield, whose reflective surface would allow him to observe Medusa without looking directly at her deadly gaze. This shield was not merely a mirror, but a specially crafted divine artifact that provided perfect clarity while protecting the user from the Gorgon's petrifying power. Athena also shared crucial intelligence about the Gorgon's location and habits, information that would prove essential for planning a successful attack against opponents whose supernatural senses could detect approaching threats from enormous distances. Hermes, messenger of the gods and guide for travellers, provided additional equipment that addressed the practical challenges of reaching and escaping from the Gorgon's remote lair. His winged sandals granted Perseus the power of flight, enabling him to approach his target from unexpected angles and retreat quickly once his mission was accomplished. The god also supplied a sword forged from adamantine, the hardest substance in existence, which could cut through the Gorgon's bronze scales and supernatural hide that would have turned ordinary weapons. Most importantly, Hermes provided Perseus with the cap of invisibility, borrowed from Hades himself, which would allow the hero to approach Medusa without being detected by her or her immortal sisters. This divine artifact was not merely a tool for concealment, but represented a temporary sharing of divine power that elevated Perseus beyond normal human limitations, while still requiring him to demonstrate courage, skill, and intelligence in completing his task. Before confronting the Gorgons directly, Perseus needed to locate the Grey Eye, 3 ancient sisters who shared a single iron tooth among them and possessed knowledge of the Gorgon's exact location. These hag-like beings, whose names meant old women, had existed since the dawn of creation and served as guardians of ancient secrets that even the gods rarely accessed. Their appearance was deliberately repulsive, withered bodies, grey hair, and faces marked by extreme age, but their knowledge was invaluable for anyone seeking to find hidden or protected locations. Perseus's encounter with the Grey required cunning rather than force, as these ancient beings were not evil but simply protective of their secrets and suspicious of strangers seeking dangerous knowledge. The hero waited until the moment when one sister was passing the shared eye to another, then quickly seized the organ and refused to return it until the Grey revealed the Gorgon's location. This act was not theft, but rather a form of divine negotiation, as the eye would be returned unharmed once the information was provided. The Grey's directions led Perseus to a remote island at the edge of the known world, where the 3 Gorgon sisters had established their lair in a cave system that provided protection from potential attackers while allowing them to hunt across the surrounding waters. The approach to their domain was littered with stone statues that had once been living creatures, sailors, warriors, and monsters who had encountered the Gorgons and been petrified by their deadly gaze. These statues served as both warning and testament to the sisters' power, their expressions frozen in moments of terror that demonstrated the fate awaiting anyone who challenged the Gorgons unprepared. Perseus's attack on Medusa required precise timing and flawless execution, as any mistake would result in his immediate petrification and the failure of his quest. Using Athena's shield as a mirror, he carefully observed the sleeping Gorgons from a safe distance, identifying Medusa by her mortal nature and planning his approach to avoid alerting her immortal sisters. The hero's divine heritage manifested in his ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, his mind clear and focused despite the magnitude of the danger he faced. The actual beheading of Medusa took only moments, but required the coordination of all Perseus's divine gifts and human skills. Flying silently through the cave using Hermes' sandals while remaining invisible beneath Hades' cap, he positioned himself above the sleeping Gorgon and struck with the adamantine sword in a single, perfectly aimed blow that severed her head cleanly from her neck. The hero immediately seized the head and placed it in a special bag provided by Athena, which would contain its deadly power while allowing him to use it as a weapon when necessary. The death of Medusa triggered immediate and dramatic consequences that demonstrated the interconnected nature of divine power and mythological causation. From her severed neck sprang two extraordinary beings, Pegasus, the winged horse whose speed and grace would make him the mount of heroes, and Chrysia, a warrior whose golden sword and supernatural strength would establish him as a hero in his own right. These births occurred because Medusa had been pregnant by Poseidon at the time of her death, the god of the sea having fathered children whose divine nature allowed them to emerge fully formed from their mother's corpse. Perseus's escape from the Gorgon's lair required all his supernatural advantages, as Stheno and Euryale awakened immediately upon their sister's death and pursued the fleeing hero with fury that shook the very foundations of their island home. Their immortal nature made them faster and stronger than their deceased sister, while their rage at Medusa's death drove them to pursue Perseus with relentless determination. Only the combination of the invisibility cap, winged sandals, and his own courage enabled the hero to outdistance his supernatural pursuers and escape to the open ocean. The flight from the Gorgon's island marked the beginning of Perseus's return journey, which would prove as eventful and dangerous as his original quest. Carrying Medusa's head in its protective bag, the hero possessed a weapon of unprecedented power that could petrify any enemy with a single glance, but this advantage came with the constant risk of accidentally triggering its deadly effect. The responsibility of controlling such dangerous power tested Perseus's wisdom and self-discipline, as much as his previous challenges had tested his courage and skill. During his flight over the coast of Ethiopia, Perseus encountered a scene that would provide him with the opportunity to demonstrate the heroic virtue of protecting the innocent from monstrous threats. Chained to a rocky outcrop at the edge of the sea was Andromeda, daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia, whose beauty had been offered as sacrifice to appease the sea monster Cetus. The creature's attacks on the Ethiopian coast were punishment for Cassiopeia's boast that her daughter was more beautiful than the Nereids, sea nymphs whose vanity had been offended by the comparison. Andromeda's situation embodied the tragic consequences of divine anger directed at mortals who overstepped proper boundaries through hubris or thoughtless boasting. Her mother's pride had condemned an innocent young woman to death at the hands of a monster whose size and ferocity exceeded anything in the natural world. Cetus emerged from the depths as a creature combining the worst aspects of whale, serpent, and dragon, its massive jaws capable of swallowing ships whole, while its hide was thick enough to turn aside the weapons of entire armies. Perseus's decision to rescue Andromeda demonstrated the heroic principle that great power should be used to protect the innocent, rather than for personal gain or glory. His divine gifts and the weapons provided by the gods enabled him to confront threats that ordinary mortals could not hope to survive, creating both the opportunity and the moral obligation to intervene in situations where injustice was being perpetrated against the helpless. The rescue also provided Perseus with the chance to win a worthy bride whose beauty and noble character matched his own heroic status. The battle between Perseus and Cetus took place in the air above the churning sea, the hero using his winged sandals to maintain mobility while attacking the monster with his adamantine sword. Cetus's massive size made it a difficult target to miss, but its thick hide and supernatural vitality required multiple wounds to bring it down. The sea monster's death throes created enormous waves that crashed against the Ethiopian coast, while its blood turned the surrounding waters dark and attracted scavenger creatures from across the Mediterranean. Perseus's marriage to Andromeda represented the successful completion of his heroic journey and his transformation from an untested young man into a mature hero worthy of divine favour and mortal respect. The wedding celebration was attended by gods and mortals alike, demonstrating Perseus's unique position as a bridge between the two realms. However, the event was disrupted by Phineus, Andromeda's former fiancé, who arrived with armed supporters to reclaim his bride by force. The confrontation between Perseus and Phineus provided the hero with an opportunity to demonstrate the terrible power of Medusa's head as a weapon in mortal combat. When negotiations failed and violence seemed inevitable, Perseus warned the wedding guests to avert their eyes, then reveal the Gorgon's head to his enemies. The petrification was instantaneous and complete. Phineus and his followers were transformed into stone statues that preserved their expressions of shock and terror for all eternity. This display of divine power established Perseus's reputation as a hero whose capabilities transcended normal human limitations. The return to Seriphos allowed Perseus to complete his original mission and rescue his mother from King Polydectes' unwanted attentions. The king's disbelief at Perseus's success quickly turned to terror when the hero offered to display his trophy, and Polydectes joined the growing collection of stone statues that marked Perseus's passage through the world. The transformation of the corrupt king demonstrated divine justice working through heroic agency, as Perseus served as the instrument through which the gods punished those who abused their power over the innocent. Perseus's eventual encounter with his grandfather Acrisius fulfilled the original prophecy in a manner that demonstrated the inescapable nature of fate, while absolving the hero of intentional wrongdoing. During athletic games held to honour the gods, Perseus participated in the discus competition, where his divine strength caused him to throw the disc far beyond normal human capability. The discus struck and killed an elderly spectator who was later revealed to be Acrisius, travelling in disguise to avoid his prophesied death at his grandson's hands. The accidental nature of the killing emphasized that heroic destiny operated according to divine will, rather than human intention. The establishment of Perseus as the archetypal hero created a template that would influence all subsequent heroic narratives in Greek mythology. His story demonstrated the essential elements of heroic achievement: divine parentage that provided supernatural advantages, a seemingly impossible quest that tested courage and resourcefulness, divine assistance that enabled success while still requiring personal virtue and skill, and the ultimate triumph over forces of chaos and evil that threatened the innocent. Perseus's adventures showed that heroism involved not merely personal glory, but the protection of civilized society against threats that exceeded normal human capacity to resist. The hero's founding of the city of Mycenae and establishment of the Perseid dynasty created lasting monuments to heroic achievement that would influence Greek culture for centuries. His descendants would include some of the greatest heroes of subsequent generations, demonstrating how heroic virtue could be transmitted through bloodlines while still requiring each individual to prove their worth through personal trials and achievements. The Perseus cycle established heroism as both a divine gift and a human responsibility, creating expectations for how those blessed with supernatural advantages should use their power in service of justice and protection of the innocent. Theseus emerged as another paradigmatic hero, whose adventures would define the civilizing role of heroic achievement in establishing order and justice within human society. Born to Aethra, princess of Troezen, and Aegeus, king of Athens, though his divine parentage through Poseidon was also claimed by some traditions, Theseus combined royal blood with supernatural strength and intelligence that would enable him to transform both his personal destiny and the political structure of ancient Greece. The circumstances of Theseus's conception and early life established him as a hero whose achievements would focus on the establishment of civilized law and social order, rather than merely the defeat of monsters or completion of impossible quests. Aegeus, unable to produce an heir with his Athenian queen, had consulted the oracle at Delphi and received a cryptic prophecy warning him not to loosen the wineskin's mouth until he returned to Athens. His failure to understand this warning led him to father Theseus during a single night spent with Aethra, after which he departed for Athens without knowing of the pregnancy. Before leaving Troezen, Aegeus placed his sword and sandals beneath a massive boulder, instructing Aethra that when their son grew strong enough to lift the stone and retrieve these tokens, he should journey to Athens to claim his birthright as heir to the throne. This test was designed to ensure that only a hero of exceptional strength and determination could claim royal status, while the tokens would serve as proof of legitimate parentage that could not be disputed by rival claimants or political enemies. Theseus's youth in Trojan was marked by the development of extraordinary physical capabilities and an innate sense of justice that would characterize his later heroic career. His grandfather Pythias, a wise king renowned for his knowledge of law and custom, provided the young hero with education in governance, strategy, and the principles of civilized society that would prove essential for his future role as king of Athens. This intellectual training complemented Theseus's natural physical gifts, creating a hero whose achievements would combine martial prowess with political wisdom. When Theseus reached maturity and successfully lifted the boulder to retrieve his father's tokens, he faced a choice between two routes to Athens that would define the nature of his heroic journey. The safe sea route would have brought him quickly to his destination, without significant danger or opportunity for heroic achievement, while the overland path was notorious for the bandits and monsters that preyed upon travellers. Theseus deliberately chose the dangerous land route, seeing it as an opportunity to prove his heroic worth while clearing the roads of threats that terrorized innocent travellers. The journey from Troezen to Athens became a series of encounters with criminals and monsters whose defeat established Theseus as a champion of justice and protector of civilized society. Each opponent he faced represented a different form of lawlessness or abuse of power that threatened the safety and prosperity of ordinary citizens. The hero's method of dealing with these threats involved turning their own evil practices against them, demonstrating that justice required not merely the defeat of wrongdoers, but their punishment in ways that reflected the nature of their crimes. Perseus, the first bandit Theseus encountered, was known as the club bearer for his practice of crushing travellers' skulls with an enormous bronze club that no ordinary man could lift or wield effectively. This criminal represented brute force used without moral constraint, preying upon the weak and defenceless for personal gain. Theseus's defeat of Perseus involved seizing the bronze club and using it to kill its former owner, then keeping the weapon as both trophy and tool for future heroic endeavours. The acquisition of the club symbolised Theseus's ability to turn the instruments of oppression into weapons of justice. Sinis, called the Pinebender, had developed a particularly cruel method of execution that involved bending pine trees down to ground level, tying victims between them, then releasing the trees to tear the unfortunate travellers apart. This elaborate torture demonstrated the sadistic pleasure that some criminals took in the suffering of their victims, elevating simple robbery into acts of deliberate cruelty that violated every principle of civilized behavior. Theseus subjected Sinis to his own method of execution, using the bandits' pine trees to destroy their former master in a demonstration of poetic justice that would become a hallmark of the hero's approach to dealing with evildoers. The Crommyonian sow represented a different category of threat, a monstrous beast whose supernatural size and ferocity made it more dangerous than any natural animal, while lacking the moral dimension that characterized human criminals. This creature had been terrorizing the region around Crommyon, devouring livestock and attacking anyone who ventured into its territory. Theseus's defeat of the sow required different tactics than those used against human opponents, demonstrating his versatility as a hero capable of adapting his methods to match the specific nature of each threat he encountered. Siren, the bandit who controlled the narrow cliff path along the Saronic Gulf, had established a toll system that involved forcing travellers to wash his feet at the edge of a precipice, then kicking them into the sea to be devoured by a giant turtle that lived in the waters below. This criminal represented the abuse of geographical advantages and the corruption of legitimate authority, as he had transformed a natural choke point into a death trap for innocent travellers. Theseus turned the tables on Siren by forcing the bandit to wash his feet, then kicking him off the cliff to feed his own turtle, demonstrating that those who abuse their power over others will ultimately face the same fate they impose on their victims. Cercyon, king of Eleusis, had established the practice of challenging all travellers to wrestling matches that invariably ended with the visitors' deaths, as the king's supernatural strength made him unbeatable in fair combat. This abuse of royal authority represented the corruption of legitimate power and the transformation of traditional hospitality into a trap for unsuspecting guests. Theseus's victory over Cercyon in wrestling demonstrated that true heroic strength could overcome even supernatural advantages when wielded in service of justice rather than personal gratification. The final and most notorious criminal on Theseus's route to Athens was Procrustes, also known as the Stretcher, who operated an inn where he offered travellers a bed that would supposedly provide perfect comfort by adjusting to their exact size. In reality, Procrustes would stretch short guests on a rack until they matched the bed's length, or cut off the legs of tall visitors to make them fit properly. This practice represented the ultimate perversion of hospitality and the imposition of artificial standards that ignored individual nature and dignity. Theseus subjected Procrustes to his own bed, demonstrating the absurdity and cruelty of forcing people to conform to arbitrary external standards rather than accepting their natural characteristics. The completion of Theseus's journey to Athens and his successful clearing of the road between Troezen and the capital established him as a hero whose achievements served the broader interests of civilized society rather than merely personal glory or divine favour. His arrival in Athens was greeted with celebration by the common people, who had already heard reports of his heroic deeds and recognised him as a champion of justice and protector of the innocent. However, his reception by the royal court was complicated by political factors that threatened to prevent his recognition as Aegeus's legitimate heir. Medea, the sorceress who had become Aegeus's current wife after her exile from Corinth, immediately recognised Theseus as a threat to her own son's claim to the Athenian throne. Her knowledge of magic and poisons made her a dangerous enemy whose schemes could potentially eliminate Theseus. The seeds of the greatest conflict in Greek mythology were sown during a wedding celebration that should have represented divine harmony and cosmic order. When Peleus, the mortal hero who had proven himself worthy through numerous adventures, was chosen to marry Thetis, the sea nymph whose beauty surpassed even that of many goddesses, the gods themselves attended the ceremony to honour this rare union between mortal and immortal realms. The wedding feast took place on Mount Pelion, with tables laden with ambrosia and nectar, while divine music filled the air as the muses sang hymns celebrating the couple's future happiness. However, one goddess had been deliberately excluded from the guest list. Eris, whose very name meant strife and discord, was considered too dangerous to invite to any celebration, as her presence inevitably led to conflict and chaos. Her appearance was as unsettling as her nature, tall and angular, with wild hair that seemed to move independently of any wind, and eyes that gleamed with malicious intelligence as she searched for opportunities to create trouble. Her exclusion from such a significant divine gathering filled her with rage that demanded satisfaction through an act of revenge that would surpass any previous display of her power. Eris arrived at the wedding uninvited, her dark robes billowing around her as she surveyed the assembled gods with undisguised contempt. Rather than disrupting the celebration through direct confrontation, which would have resulted in her immediate expulsion, she devised a subtler form of vengeance that would exploit the vanity and competitive nature of the divine guests. From her robes, she produced a golden apple of extraordinary beauty, its surface gleaming with an inner light that seemed to shift and dance as observers watched. Inscribed upon this fruit in letters that blazed with divine fire were the words "to the fairest," a designation that would prove more destructive than any weapon forged by Hephaestus. The goddess cast the apple into the midst of the wedding feast, where it rolled across the divine table before coming to rest among the assembled deities. The inscription immediately caught the attention of every goddess present, but three in particular felt their divine pride challenged by the implicit competition. Hera, queen of the gods and wife of Zeus, considered herself the natural recipient of any honour related to beauty or divine status. Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, possessed a beauty that combined intellectual grace with martial strength in ways that no other deity could match. Aphrodite, born from the sea foam created by Uranus's severed genitals, embodied physical beauty and sexual allure in their most perfect forms. Each goddess approached the golden apple with the absolute certainty that she was its intended recipient, creating a confrontation that threatened to disrupt not only the wedding celebration, but the entire cosmic order. Hera's claim rested on her position as queen of the gods and her role as protector of marriage and family relationships, arguing that her status alone made her the most deserving of any honour related to beauty or divine favour. Her appearance at the wedding exemplified regal magnificence. She wore robes of deep purple silk that emphasized her royal status, while a crown of precious metals and gems caught the light with every movement of her head. Athena's argument focused on the connection between true beauty and wisdom, claiming that physical attractiveness without intellectual depth was merely superficial ornamentation that lacked lasting value. Her own appearance demonstrated this principle, combining the grace of feminine beauty with the strength and confidence that came from her role as a warrior goddess. Her grey eyes seemed to analyse every aspect of the situation, while her athletic build suggested both physical capability and mental discipline. The owl perched on her shoulder observed the proceedings with the same keen intelligence that characterised its mistress. Aphrodite's case was perhaps the most straightforward. As the goddess specifically responsible for beauty and love, she argued that the apple naturally belonged to her by divine right. Her appearance at the wedding was calculated to demonstrate her superiority in this regard, with golden hair that seemed to glow with inner light and features so perfect that even other gods found themselves momentarily distracted by her presence. Her diaphanous robes revealed rather than concealed her form, while the girdle of love magic that she wore enhanced her natural attractiveness to levels that could overwhelm mortal minds. Zeus, recognizing that any decision he made would create lasting enmity with two of the three claimants while potentially destabilizing his own marriage, refused to judge the competition himself. His political wisdom warned him that this situation had the potential to create divisions within the Olympian hierarchy that could threaten his authority and the stability of the cosmic order he'd worked so hard to establish. Instead, he declared that the judgment should be made by a mortal whose perspective would be untainted by divine politics and whose decision could not be attributed to favoritism or fear of divine retribution. The mortal chosen for this impossible task was Paris, also known as Alexander, a prince of Troy whose life had been marked by prophecy and divine intervention from the moment of his birth. His mother, Queen Hecuba of Troy, had experienced a prophetic dream during her pregnancy that showed her giving birth to a flaming torch that would burn down the entire city of Troy. The court seers interpreted this vision as a warning that her unborn child would bring destruction to the kingdom, leading King Priam to order the infant's exposure on Mount Ida immediately after birth. However, the baby Paris was discovered and rescued by shepherds who raised him as their own son, unaware of his royal heritage. The young man grew to maturity in the pastoral environment of the mountain slopes, developing skills in hunting and animal husbandry while remaining ignorant of his true identity and the prophecy that had shaped his early life. His natural intelligence and leadership abilities eventually led to his recognition as the most capable shepherd in the region, while his physical appearance combined the rugged strength developed through outdoor labour with features that retained hints of his noble bloodline. Paris's reputation for fairness and wisdom in settling disputes among the local shepherds had reached divine attention, making him seem an ideal candidate for resolving the conflict between the three goddesses. His isolation from court politics and divine affairs suggested that he could render an unbiased judgment based purely on the merits of each claimant rather than being influenced by considerations of power or personal advantage. Hermes, serving as Zeus's messenger, transported the three goddesses to Mount Ida, where Paris was tending his flocks, completely unaware that his simple pastoral life was about to be transformed by divine intervention. The appearance of three magnificent goddesses in the remote mountain setting created a scene of otherworldly beauty that overwhelmed Paris's mortal senses. Each deity manifested in her most impressive form, their divine radiance illuminating the entire mountainside, while their presence filled the air with power that made ordinary breathing difficult. Paris found himself unable to move or speak as the goddesses approached, their combined beauty and authority creating a sensory experience that exceeded anything in mortal experience. Hermes explained the situation to the bewildered shepherd, presenting the golden apple and informing Paris that Zeus himself had chosen him to determine which goddess deserved the title of fairest. The weight of this responsibility was immediately apparent to Paris, who recognized that his decision would affect beings whose power could reshape the world according to their whims. However, the direct command of the king of the gods left him no choice but to accept the role of judge, despite his awareness that any decision he made would create powerful enemies among the rejected goddesses. The three goddesses, recognizing that their fate lay in the hands of a mortal shepherd, each began presenting their case with arguments designed to appeal to different aspects of human desire and ambition. Rather than relying solely on their physical beauty, each offered bribes that would transform Paris's life in ways that matched their particular spheres of divine influence. These offers revealed not only the goddesses' understanding of mortal psychology, but also their willingness to use their divine power to influence the judgment in their favour. Hera, speaking first as befitted her status as Queen of the Gods, offered Paris dominion over all of Europe and Asia, promising to make him the most powerful ruler in the world if he declared her the fairest. Her offer was accompanied by visions of vast armies marching under his command, cities bowing before his authority, and treasures beyond mortal imagination flowing into his coffers. The goddess's presentation emphasized the practical advantages of choosing her, political power that would elevate Paris from his humble origins to a position rivaling that of the greatest kings in history. Athena's offer focused on military glory and intellectual achievement, promising to make Paris the greatest warrior and wisest man of his generation if he selected her as the winner. Her visions showed the shepherd prince leading victorious armies in battles where his tactical genius would overcome any opposition, while his wisdom would make him a legendary figure whose name would be remembered throughout history. The goddess emphasized that her gifts would be earned through personal excellence rather than mere political maneuvering, appealing to whatever noble instincts Paris possessed. Aphrodite's proposal was both simpler and more immediately appealing than those of her rivals. She offered Paris the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, promising that this mortal female would surpass even goddesses in physical attractiveness, and that their love would be legendary throughout all future ages. The goddess accompanied her offer with visions of Helen, daughter of Zeus and Leda, whose beauty had already made her famous throughout the Greek world and whose marriage to Menelaus, king of Sparta, had not diminished her appeal to other men. The choice Paris faced represented different approaches to human fulfillment and achievement, each with its own advantages and potential consequences. Hera's offer of political power appealed to ambition and the desire for worldly success, but would require Paris to abandon his simple life and enter the dangerous world of royal politics, where enemies and betrayals were constant threats. Athena's promise of military and intellectual excellence offered personal development and earned glory, but would demand a lifetime of struggle and conflict to achieve and maintain such distinction. Aphrodite's gift seemed the most personally satisfying and immediately attainable, requiring no years of struggle or political maneuvering to enjoy. The goddess's description of Helen's beauty, combined with her promise that their love would be mutual and passionate, created an irresistible vision of romantic fulfillment that overshadowed the more abstract benefits offered by her rivals. Paris's youth and inexperience with the complexities of divine politics made him susceptible to the appeal of immediate gratification over long-term strategic advantage. The shepherd prince's decision to award the golden apple to Aphrodite was made with full awareness of its consequences, but without true understanding of the forces he was unleashing. His choice was influenced not only by the goddess's bribe, but also by her superior beauty, which seemed to embody the very concept of physical perfection that the competition was meant to judge. Aphrodite's radiant smile, as she accepted the apple, contrasted sharply with the expressions of rage and humiliation that crossed the faces of Hera and Athena, whose fury at this rejection would have immediate and lasting consequences. The two rejected goddesses departed from Mount Ida, with their hatred focused not only on Paris, but on all of Troy, swearing vengeance that would ultimately fulfill the prophecy surrounding the prince's birth. Hera's anger was particularly intense because the judgment had been rendered by a mortal whose opinion should have been irrelevant compared to her divine status and authority. Athena's rage was compounded by her recognition that Paris had chosen immediate gratification over wisdom and earned achievement, demonstrating exactly the kind of poor judgment that she found most offensive in mortals. Aphrodite's fulfillment of her promise required careful planning and divine manipulation, as Helen was already married to Menelaus and lived in Sparta under circumstances that made casual contact with foreign princes unlikely. The goddess began by revealing Paris's true identity to him, explaining his royal heritage and arranging for his return to Troy, where he would be recognized as Prince Priam's son. This revelation transformed the shepherd's understanding of his place in the world, while providing him with the status and resources necessary to undertake a diplomatic mission to Sparta. Paris's return to Troy created initial joy among the royal family, who had mourned their lost son for decades without knowing his fate. King Priam's happiness at recovering his child overshadowed any memory of the prophecy that had led to the infant's exposure, while Queen Hecuba's maternal instincts made her eager to welcome her son regardless of any potential consequences. The prince's brothers, including the noble Hector, accepted him into the royal family with varying degrees of enthusiasm, though some retained concerns about the prophecy and its potential fulfillment. The diplomatic mission to Sparta was ostensibly designed to strengthen relationships between Troy and the Greek kingdoms, but its true purpose was to provide Paris with access to Helen under circumstances that would allow Aphrodite's magic to work its intended effect. Menelaus received the Trojan prince with appropriate hospitality, unaware that his guest's presence represented a threat to his marriage and the stability of his kingdom. The Spartan king's own absence on a diplomatic mission to Crete provided the opportunity that Aphrodite had been orchestrating. The meeting between Paris and Helen was engineered by divine intervention to create an immediate and overwhelming mutual attraction that transcended normal human emotions. Aphrodite's power ensured that both participants would experience love at first sight with an intensity that made all other considerations seem irrelevant by comparison. Helen's beauty, which had been legendary throughout Greece even before divine enhancement, became absolutely irresistible to Paris, while the prince's own attractiveness was magnified by the goddess's magic until Helen found herself unable to think of anything else. The elopement that followed was not simply a case of adultery or political betrayal, but the result of divine compulsion that neither mortal participant could reasonably have been expected to resist. Helen's abandonment of her husband, daughter, and royal responsibilities in Sparta was driven by magical influence that overwhelmed her natural loyalty and maternal instincts. Similarly, Paris's disregard for the laws of hospitality and the political consequences of his actions reflected the power of Aphrodite's intervention, rather than mere personal weakness or moral failing. The couple's flight from Sparta to Troy was accomplished with divine assistance that enabled them to evade immediate pursuit while carrying away substantial portions of Menelaus's treasury and royal possessions. This theft added insult to injury from the Spartan perspective, transforming what might have been viewed as a romantic scandal into an act of international piracy that demanded military response. The treasure's presence in Troy would later serve as additional justification for the Greek expedition's demands and their refusal to accept diplomatic solutions to the crisis. Menelaus's discovery of his wife's disappearance and the theft of his possessions created a rage that was amplified by the humiliation of being cuckolded by a guest who had violated every principle of proper behaviour between host and visitor. The Spartan king's immediate response was to seek assistance from his brother Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae, whose authority over many Greek kingdoms made him the natural leader for any military response to Trojan aggression. The brothers' consultation resulted in the decision to assemble the largest military expedition in Greek history to recover Helen and punish Troy for its prince's crimes. The mobilization of the Greek forces required invoking the oath of Tyndareus, a pledge that all of Helen's former suitors had sworn before her marriage to Menelaus. This oath bound the greatest heroes and kings of Greece to defend Helen's marriage and support her chosen husband against any threats to their union. The oath had been designed to prevent conflicts between the rejected suitors, but its terms now required them to participate in a military expedition against Troy, regardless of their personal feelings about the situation. Agamemnon's role as expedition leader was established through his superior military resources and political influence, rather than any particular connection to the original grievance. His kingdom of Mycenae possessed the largest navy and most experienced army in Greece, while his network of alliances and tributary relationships provided access to additional forces from across the Greek world. The king's own motivation for leading the expedition combined genuine outrage at Trojan behaviour with recognition that a successful campaign would enhance his prestige and demonstrate Greek military superiority. The assembly of the Greek forces at Aulis created the largest concentration of military power that had ever been gathered for a single campaign. Ships arrived from every major Greek kingdom, carrying warriors whose reputations had been established through previous conflicts and adventures. The diversity of the assembled forces reflected the political fragmentation of the Greek world, with each contingent maintaining its own command structure and cultural identity, while accepting Agamemnon's overall authority for the duration of the campaign. Achilles emerged as the most formidable warrior among the assembled Greeks, his divine heritage through his mother Thetis, granting him capabilities that exceeded those of any purely mortal fighter. His appearance combined youthful beauty with physical perfection that reflected his semi-divine nature. Tall and powerfully built, with golden hair that seemed to catch and hold sunlight, and eyes that blazed with an inner fire when his legendary rage was aroused. His armour, crafted by Hephaestus himself, was both functional protection and artistic masterpiece, its bronze surfaces decorated with scenes of cosmic significance, while providing defence against any weapon wielded by mortal hands. The hero's reputation for invincibility in combat was matched by his volatile temperament and fierce pride, characteristics that would prove both advantageous and problematic during the long siege that lay ahead. His mother's attempts to prevent his participation in the expedition by hiding him among the women of Lycomedes' court had ultimately failed when Odysseus discovered his identity through a clever stratagem involving weapons concealed among feminine gifts. Achilles' decision to join the expedition, despite knowing that it would lead to his early death, demonstrated the heroic preference for eternal glory over long life that characterized the greatest warriors of his generation. Odysseus brought a different set of qualities to the Greek expedition, his reputation resting on intellectual cunning and strategic thinking rather than pure martial prowess. His appearance was less imposing than that of heroes like Achilles or Ajax. He was of medium height with a stocky build that suggested endurance rather than explosive power, while his weathered features and calculating eyes revealed a mind constantly analysing situations for potential advantages. His ability to devise solutions to seemingly impossible problems had already been demonstrated through his role in recruiting other heroes for the expedition, including his successful unmasking of Achilles despite Thetis's elaborate deception. The king of Ithaca's reluctance to join the expedition had been overcome only through direct compulsion, as his own attempt to avoid military service by feigning madness had been exposed through a test involving his infant son Telemachus. His participation brought not only his personal skills, but also his contingent of Ithacan warriors, experienced sailors whose knowledge of Mediterranean waters would prove valuable during the long journey to Troy. Odysseus's strategic mind immediately recognized the challenges that lay ahead, understanding that the siege of a well-fortified city would require patience, cunning, and innovative tactics rather than simple military might. Ajax the Greater, son of Telamon and king of Salamis, represented the archetypal warrior whose strength and courage made him second only to Achilles among the Greek champions. His massive frame stood nearly 7 feet tall, with muscles developed through constant training and combat experience that enabled him to wield weapons too heavy for ordinary men to lift. His shield, crafted from 7 layers of oxhide reinforced with bronze, was large enough to provide protection for multiple warriors, while his spear could penetrate any armour when driven by his enormous strength. The hero's reputation for defensive combat was particularly valuable in siege warfare, where the ability to hold positions against overwhelming odds often determined the outcome of critical engagements. His steady temperament and unwavering courage provided stability for the Greek forces during moments when other heroes' volatile personalities created internal conflicts. Ajax's loyalty to the expedition's goals never wavered throughout the long siege, making him one of Agamemnon's most reliable subordinates despite the political tensions that affected relationships among the Greek leaders. Diomedes, king of Argos and son of the hero Tydeus, brought youth and aggressive energy to the Greek leadership, his combat skills enhanced by divine favour that would eventually enable him to wound gods themselves during the fighting at Troy. His appearance reflected his warrior nature, lean and athletic, with scars that marked his body like a map of previous battles and eyes that burned with the fierce joy of combat that characterized the greatest fighters of his generation. His armour bore the symbols of his divine patron Athena, whose wisdom guided his tactical decisions, while her protection enabled him to survive encounters that would have destroyed lesser warriors. The prince's contingent from Argos included some of the most experienced soldiers in the Greek expedition, veterans of previous campaigns who had proven their loyalty and effectiveness in earlier conflicts. His leadership style combined personal example with tactical innovation, inspiring his followers through demonstrations of courage, while adapting his methods to meet the specific challenges posed by siege warfare. Diomedes' relationship with Athena would prove particularly important during the conflict, as the goddess's favour enabled him to achieve victories that exceeded normal human capabilities. The Greek expedition's departure from Aulis was delayed by adverse winds that prevented the massive fleet from sailing toward Troy, creating the first major crisis of the campaign before it had even begun. The seer Calchas revealed that the unfavourable weather was caused by Artemis's anger at Agamemnon for boasting that his hunting skills exceeded those of the goddess herself. The solution to this divine displeasure required a sacrifice that would test the expedition leader's commitment to the campaign's success against his natural paternal feelings. Artemis demanded the sacrifice of Iphigenia, Agamemnon's eldest daughter, whose death would appease the goddess's wounded pride while demonstrating the king's willingness to pay any price for military success. The requirement created a moral dilemma that revealed the darker aspects of heroic culture, where personal relationships were subordinated to considerations of honour, glory, and political necessity. Agamemnon's decision to comply with the divine demand, achieved through deception that brought Iphigenia to Aulis under the pretense of marriage to Achilles, demonstrated the ruthless calculation that characterized successful military leadership during this period. The sacrifice itself was conducted with religious ceremony that emphasized its necessity for the expedition's success, while attempting to minimize its obvious moral horror. Some traditions suggest that Artemis substituted a deer for the human victim at the last moment, spiriting Iphigenia away to serve as her priestess. But the psychological impact on Agamemnon and his family remained the same. The king's willingness to sacrifice his own daughter for military objectives created lasting resentment from his wife Clytemnestra that would ultimately lead to his assassination upon his return from Troy, creating a cycle of vengeance that would plague the house of Atreus for generations to come. The concept of divine justice in Greek mythology operated through principles that differed fundamentally from mortal legal systems, emphasizing the maintenance of cosmic order rather than individual fairness or mercy. The gods' responses to human transgressions were designed to preserve the established hierarchy between divine and mortal realms, while demonstrating the consequences of challenging divine authority through acts of hubris. These punishments often involved physical transformation that served both as immediate penalty and permanent reminder of the transgression, creating visible examples that would deter similar offences by other mortals. Arachne's transformation into the fur spider exemplified how divine justice operated when mortals challenged the gods' supremacy in their specific domains of expertise. The young woman from Lydia possessed extraordinary skill in weaving and textile creation, her fingers moving with supernatural dexterity as she created fabrics whose beauty and complexity exceeded anything previously produced by mortal hands. Her tapestries depicted scenes from daily life with such accuracy that observers could almost hear the conversations between the figures she portrayed, while her decorative patterns incorporated mathematical precision that revealed deep understanding of geometric principles. The maiden's reputation for exceptional craftsmanship spread throughout the ancient world, attracting customers who travelled vast distances to commission works that would enhance their social status and demonstrate their appreciation for artistic excellence. Arachne's workshop became a centre of textile innovation, where new techniques were developed and refined, her apprentices learning methods that would influence weaving traditions for centuries to come. The quality of her work was so extraordinary that admirers began suggesting her skills rivaled those of Athena herself, the goddess who had taught humanity the arts of weaving and textile production. Initially, these comparisons were offered as compliments designed to emphasize Arachne's exceptional abilities rather than literal challenges to divine supremacy. However, the young woman's pride in her achievements gradually transformed these flattering observations into personal beliefs about her own capabilities. She began accepting the comparisons as accurate assessments, eventually declaring that her weaving skills exceeded those of any goddess and that she could defeat Athena herself in direct competition. This progression from justified pride in genuine achievement to hubris that challenged divine authority represented exactly the kind of transgression that demanded divine response. Athena's initial reaction to reports of Arachne's boasts demonstrated the goddess's preference for education over immediate punishment when dealing with mortal transgressions. Disguising herself as an elderly woman whose bent posture and wrinkled features suggested decades of experience in textile work, the goddess visited Arachne's workshop to observe the young woman's techniques and offered gentle warnings about the dangers of excessive pride. Her aged appearance was carefully crafted to inspire respect for accumulated wisdom, while concealing her true identity until the appropriate moment for revelation. The disguised goddess praised Arachne's undeniable skill while cautioning her against making comparisons that challenged divine authority, explaining that mortals who claimed superiority over gods invariably faced terrible consequences for their presumption. Her warnings were delivered with the patient tone of an experienced teacher attempting to guide a talented but misguided student away from dangerous mistakes. Athena's advice emphasized that human excellence should be celebrated without diminishing divine accomplishments, maintaining the proper relationship between mortal achievement and divine supremacy. Arachne's response to these warnings revealed the depth of her transformation, from skilled artisan to prideful challenger of divine order. Rather than accepting the elderly woman's wisdom, she dismissed the advice as jealousy from a lesser weaver whose own abilities had declined with age. Her rejection of counsel demonstrated not only personal arrogance, but also failure to recognize the divine nature of her visitor, compounding her original offense with additional disrespect toward Athena's disguised form. The young woman's insistence that she could defeat any opponent, mortal or divine, in weaving competition forced the goddess to abandon her educational approach in favour of direct confrontation. Athena's revelation of her true identity transformed the workshop atmosphere from casual conversation to cosmic confrontation, her divine radiance filling the space with light that made ordinary vision difficult, while her presence created pressure that made breathing laboured for the mortal witnesses present. The goddess's appearance in her full divine glory demonstrated the vast difference between mortal and immortal nature, her perfect features and supernatural beauty contrasting sharply with Arachne's merely human attractiveness. The owl perched on Athena's shoulder observed the proceedings with the same keen intelligence that characterized its mistress, while the goddess's armour gleamed with divine light that reflected off every metallic surface in the workshop. The weaving contest that followed was conducted with formal ceremony that emphasized its significance as a test of divine versus mortal capabilities rather than simple artistic competition. 2 looms were prepared with identical materials and tools, ensuring that the outcome would depend purely on skill and creativity rather than equipment advantages. The contest stakes were clearly established. Victory would vindicate the winner's claims about superior ability, while defeat would require acknowledgement of inferiority and appropriate submission to the victor's authority. Athena's tapestry depicted scenes of divine justice and the consequences of mortal hubris, her images showing previous instances where humans who challenged the gods had faced terrible punishments for their presumption. The central scene portrayed her own contest with Poseidon for patronage of Athens, demonstrating her wisdom in providing the olive tree versus the sea god's less practical gift of a saltwater spring. Surrounding this main image were smaller scenes showing the fates of mortals who had challenged divine authority, Niobe weeping over her dead children, Marsyas being flayed alive for challenging Apollo to a musical contest, and other examples of divine retribution for excessive pride. The goddess's technical execution was flawless in every detail, her divine fingers moving with precision that no mortal could match, while her supernatural perception enabled her to create effects that transcended normal artistic limitations. The colours in her tapestry seemed to glow within a light that made them more vivid than any natural pigments could achieve, while the figures appeared to move slightly when observed from different angles. The mathematical precision of her patterns reflected divine understanding of geometric principles that governed cosmic order, creating harmonies that pleased both eye and mind in ways that purely mortal art could never accomplish. Arachne's competing tapestry chose a deliberately provocative theme that demonstrated her defiant attitude toward divine authority even as she worked to prove her artistic superiority. Her images depicted the gods' abuses of power and their mistreatment of mortals, focusing particularly on instances where divine beings had used their authority for personal gratification rather than cosmic justice. The central scene showed Zeus's numerous transformations for seducing mortal women, surrounded by smaller images of other gods behaving badly, Apollo pursuing unwilling nymphs, Poseidon's violent rapes, and Dionysus's destructive festivals. The young woman's technical skill proved genuinely extraordinary, her mortal fingers achieving effects that approached divine quality through pure dedication and natural talent. Her colours were perfectly blended, her figures anatomically accurate, and her compositions balanced with mathematical precision that revealed deep understanding of artistic principles. The emotional impact of her work was particularly powerful, as her images conveyed the suffering and injustice experienced by mortals who became victims of divine caprice. The technical excellence of her execution made her criticisms of divine behaviour all the more effective and offensive. The completion of both tapestries created a moment of cosmic tension as Athena examined Arachne's work and recognised not only its exceptional quality, but also its deliberate challenge to divine dignity and authority. The goddess's rage at being matched in technical skill was compounded by fury at the subject matter Arachne had chosen, which transformed artistic competition into moral accusation against the entire divine order. The young woman's ability to create art that equaled divine quality, while using that skill to criticize divine behavior, represented exactly the kind of threat to cosmic hierarchy that demanded immediate and decisive response. Athena's destruction of Arachne's tapestry was accomplished with controlled violence that demonstrated divine power while expressing the goddess's outrage at both the technical challenge and moral criticism contained in the mortal's work. Her divine strength tore the fabric to shreds within moments, destroying hours of meticulous labour in an act that symbolized the ease with which gods could undo human achievements. The destruction was followed by physical assault on Arachne herself, as Athena struck the young woman repeatedly with her shuttle, the tool of textile creation becoming an instrument of divine punishment. The transformation that followed was both punishment and twisted form of mercy, as Athena's magic changed Arachne's human form into that of a spider, while preserving her consciousness and weaving abilities. The metamorphosis began with the shrinking of her body, human proportions compressing into the compact form necessary for arachnid existence. Her arms multiplied into 8 legs, whose joints bent at angles impossible for human anatomy, while her fingers fused and transformed into spinnerets capable of producing silk thread from her own body. Her human face contracted into the simplified features of a spider, her eyes multiplying and repositioning to provide the wide-angle vision necessary for detecting prey and predators. The psychological horror of Arachne's transformation exceeded the physical changes, as her human intelligence remained intact within her arachnid form, allowing her to understand exactly what had happened to her while being unable to communicate her distress to other humans. Her artistic abilities survived the metamorphosis, but were now limited to creating webs whose geometric precision and structural complexity would serve as permanent reminders of both her original skill and the consequences of challenging divine authority. The transformation ensured that Arachne would continue practicing her craft for eternity, but in a form that emphasized her subordination to divine power rather than her previous claims of superiority. The establishment of spiders as permanent reminders of divine justice served multiple purposes within the cosmic order, creating visible examples of transformation punishment, while providing ongoing demonstrations of the consequences awaiting those who challenged divine authority through excessive pride. Every web that humans encountered would remind them of Arachne's fate, reinforcing the proper relationship between mortal achievement and divine supremacy. The mathematical precision and artistic beauty of spiderwebs would continue to inspire human artists while simultaneously warning them against the hubris that had destroyed their legendary predecessor. Niobe's transformation into stone represented another category of divine justice, one that addressed the specific transgression of claiming superiority in areas where gods held particular authority. The Queen of Thebes possessed genuine cause for maternal pride, having given birth to 14 children whose beauty, intelligence, and accomplishments made them the envy of other royal families throughout the ancient world. Her 7 sons had developed into skilled warriors and leaders whose military prowess promised to extend Theban influence across the Greek world, while her 7 daughters combined physical beauty with the cultural refinements appropriate to their royal status. The queen's initial expressions of pride in her children were entirely appropriate for a mother whose offspring had achieved genuine excellence in their respective pursuits. Her public celebrations of their accomplishments served legitimate purposes in enhancing Theban prestige while providing positive examples for other families to emulate. However, these justified expressions of maternal satisfaction gradually evolved into comparative statements that placed her children above those of the gods themselves, creating the conditions for divine retribution that would destroy everything she valued most. The specific trigger for divine anger came during a festival honouring Leto, the Titaness who had given birth to Apollo and Artemis, after enduring tremendous hardships imposed by Hera's jealousy. The religious ceremony required Theban women to offer prayers and sacrifices acknowledging Leto's divine status and the extraordinary nature of her twin children, who had become two of the most powerful and influential members of the Olympian pantheon. Niobe's participation in this festival provided the opportunity for her to make the fatal comparison that would transform justified pride into punishable hubris. Speaking before the assembled women of Thebes, Niobe declared that her own maternal achievements exceeded those of Leto, pointing out that she had produced 14 children compared to the Titaness's mere 2 offspring. Her argument emphasized not only numerical superiority, but also the quality of her children's accomplishments, claiming that her sons and daughters surpassed Apollo and Artemis in every measurable category of excellence. The Queen's rhetoric transformed religious ceremony into competitive comparison, challenging divine status through direct numerical and qualitative arguments that could not be ignored without undermining the entire structure of divine authority. Leto's response to these insulting comparisons demonstrated the swift and terrible nature of divine retribution when mortals challenged the gods' most fundamental relationships and achievements. Rather than confronting Niobe directly, the Titaness appealed to her children for vindication of their divine status and punishment of the mortal who had dared to claim superiority over their family. Apollo and Artemis, whose own pride in their divine nature was matched by fierce loyalty to their mother, immediately agreed to provide the demonstration of divine power that would restore proper respect for their family's status. The twin gods' assault on Niobe's children was conducted with systematic precision that emphasized both their supernatural archery skills and their determination to make the punishment fit the specific nature of the offense. Apollo targeted Niobe's 7 sons, his silver arrows finding their marks with divine accuracy that made defense or escape impossible. Each shot was carefully aimed to cause immediate death, while demonstrating the futility of mortal resistance to divine will, the young men falling one by one despite their warrior training and physical prowess. Artemis focused her attack on Niobe's 7 daughters, her golden bow proving equally deadly as her brother's weapon, while her arrows carried the additional curse of preventing any possibility of marriage or motherhood for the victims. The goddess's selection of female targets reflected both practical considerations of divine labour division and symbolic emphasis on the maternal claims that had triggered the original offence. The systematic destruction of Niobe's daughters eliminated not only her current pride, but also any possibility of future grandchildren who might have provided consolation for her loss. The speed with which Apollo and Artemis completed their terrible work demonstrated divine capabilities that exceeded mortal comprehension. 14 lives ended in the time required for ordinary archers to nock and loose a single arrow. The precision of their shooting left no doubt about the supernatural nature of the attack, each arrow striking vital organs with accuracy that no mortal archer could have achieved. The simultaneous nature of the assault prevented any of Niobe's children from warning or protecting their siblings, ensuring that the entire family would be destroyed before effective resistance could be organized. Niobe's reaction to witnessing the systematic destruction of all her children revealed the psychological devastation that accompanied physical loss, her maternal grief exceeding normal human capacity for emotional pain. The Queen's initial disbelief gave way to overwhelming sorrow that paralyzed her ability to function, her body remaining motionless beside the corpses of her children, while her mind struggled to comprehend the magnitude of her loss. Her grief was so profound that it transcended normal human emotional responses, creating conditions suitable for the divine transformation that would serve as both punishment and preservation of her suffering. The metamorphosis that changed Niobe from living woman to stone statue was accomplished through divine magic that preserved her consciousness, while eliminating her ability to move or speak, creating eternal punishment that would serve as permanent reminder of the consequences of challenging divine authority through excessive pride. The transformation began with the hardening of her skin, human flesh gradually acquiring the texture and appearance of marble, while retaining enough sensitivity to feel the weight of her grief. Her features became fixed in expressions of overwhelming sorrow, her face a masterpiece of sculptural art that conveyed emotional pain with devastating effectiveness. The stone form that Niobe assumed was not merely decorative sculpture, but functional monument to divine justice, her tears continuing to flow as natural springs that would provide water for travellers, while serving as permanent reminders of maternal grief and divine retribution. The location of her transformation, on Mount Sipylus in her native Lydia, became a pilgrimage site where mortals could observe the consequences of hubris, while offering prayers for divine mercy in their own lives. The continuous flow of tears from the stone face ensured that Niobe's punishment would remain visible and emotionally impactful for all future generations. Actaeon's transformation into a stag represented a different category of divine justice, one that addressed violations of divine privacy rather than direct challenges to divine authority or status. The young hunter's fate was determined not by intentional transgression, but by accidental observation of Artemis bathing, a violation of divine modesty that demanded punishment despite its unintentional nature. His story demonstrated that divine justice operated according to absolute standards that made no allowances for mortal ignorance or innocent mistakes when sacred boundaries were crossed. The circumstances leading to Actaeon's fatal encounter with the goddess reflected the dangerous intersection between mortal activities and divine privacy in wilderness areas, where both humans and immortals pursued their respective interests. The young man had established a reputation as an exceptional hunter, whose skills in tracking and archery made him welcome in the courts of kings, who valued his ability to provide meat for their tables and eliminate dangerous predators from their territories. His knowledge of forest paths and animal behaviour had been developed through years of experience in remote areas where few mortals ventured, creating familiarity with wilderness regions that gods considered their private domains. On the day that would determine his fate, Actaeon had been pursuing a particularly elusive deer whose tracks had led him deep into mountainous terrain, far from any human settlement. His dedication to the hunt had caused him to ignore the growing distance from civilization and the approach of midday heat that normally would have prompted him to seek shelter and rest. The intensity of his focus on tracking his quarry prevented him from recognizing the sacred nature of the grove he was approaching, where clear springs and ancient trees created an environment of supernatural beauty that should have warned him of divine presence. Artemis had chosen this secluded location for her midday bath, specifically because its remoteness and difficult access made mortal intrusion unlikely, allowing her to enjoy the refreshing waters without the need for constant vigilance against unwanted observers. The goddess's routine included dismissing her nymph attendants during these private moments, creating complete solitude that enhanced her enjoyment of the cool water while providing absolute privacy for activities that no mortal should witness. Her divine beauty was particularly stunning when unencumbered by clothing or hunting gear, her perfect form reflecting the ideal of feminine grace, combined with athletic strength that characterized her unique position among the Olympian deities. Actaeon's arrival at the grove occurred at precisely the moment when Artemis was most vulnerable to observation, her divine form visible in the clear water, while her attention was focused on the pleasant sensations of bathing rather than potential threats to her privacy. The hunter's first glimpse of the goddess created immediate recognition of her divine nature, her supernatural beauty, and the otherworldly quality of her presence, making her identity unmistakable despite his lack of previous direct contact with immortal beings. His reaction combined natural masculine appreciation for feminine beauty with religious awe at witnessing divine majesty, creating a complex emotional response that paralyzed his ability to retreat before discovery. The goddess's awareness of mortal observation triggered immediate rage that reflected both personal violation and cosmic transgression, as Actaeon's presence transformed her private sanctuary into a scene of unwanted voyeurism that demanded swift retribution. Her divine modesty had been compromised by mortal eyes that had no right to witness her unclothed form, while the sacred nature of her bathing ritual had been polluted by unauthorized human presence. The violation was compounded by Actaeon's continued observation, his shocked immobility preventing the immediate retreat that might have minimized the offense. Artemis's transformation of Actaeon into a stag was accomplished through direct application of divine power rather than gradual metamorphosis, the hunter's human form changing instantly into that of a magnificent deer whose size and antler development reflected his former human status and hunting prowess. His human consciousness remained intact within the animal body, allowing him to understand his transformation while being unable to communicate his identity to other humans or plead for mercy from the goddess whose privacy he had violated. The psychological horror of the change was intensified by his immediate recognition that his own hunting dogs would not recognize his transformed appearance and would treat him as legitimate prey. The physical aspects of Actaeon's transformation were precisely calculated to create maximum irony and suffering, as his new form made him the perfect target for the hunting skills he had spent his lifetime developing. His human knowledge of tracking techniques and animal behavior became disadvantages that his predators could exploit, while his familiarity with the terrain worked against him as he attempted to find hiding places that his own hunting experience had taught him to search. The stag's natural speed and agility were insufficient to compensate for these disadvantages, particularly when facing the supernatural tracking abilities of his own divinely trained hunting hounds. The pursuit that followed Actaeon's transformation demonstrated the terrible efficiency of divine justice when applied to violations of sacred boundaries, the hunter's own dogs turning against their former master with the same dedication they had previously shown in serving his hunting expeditions. The pack's inability to recognize Actaeon's human identity within his transformed body eliminated any possibility of mercy or recognition that might have prevented the tragic conclusion. Their hunting instincts, honed through years of training and successful expeditions, made them perfectly suited to track and kill the magnificent stag that their former master had become. Lycaon's transformation into a wolf represented the most extreme form of divine punishment for violations of hospitality and religious law, his metamorphosis serving as both personal retribution and cosmic warning about the consequences of testing divine patience through systematic transgression. The king of Arcadia had established a reputation for cruelty and impiety that exceeded normal human wickedness, his actions challenging not only specific divine commands but the fundamental principles of civilized behavior that distinguished humans from wild beasts. The transformation of Greek mythology from oral tradition to foundational cultural force occurred through its systematic integration into every aspect of classical Greek society, creating a comprehensive worldview that shaped religious practices, civic identity, and intellectual development for over a millennium. The mythological narratives that had emerged from primitive storytelling traditions became the organizing principles around which Greek civilization constructed its understanding of divine will, human nature, and cosmic order. This integration was so complete that mythology ceased to be merely entertainment or religious doctrine, instead becoming the fundamental framework through which Greeks interpreted their relationship with both the divine realm and their fellow mortals. The Panathenea festival exemplified how mythological narratives were transformed into elaborate civic celebrations that reinforced both religious devotion and political identity. This grand festival, held every 4 years in Athens with smaller annual celebrations in intervening years, commemorated Athena's victory over Poseidon in their contest for patronage of the city, while simultaneously celebrating Athenian cultural achievements and military prowess. The festival's central ritual involved the presentation of a specially woven peplos to the goddess's cult statue. a garment created by selected Athenian women whose work was considered a form of religious service that connected human craftsmanship with divine appreciation. The procession that carried this sacred garment from the city's outskirts to the Acropolis became a spectacular display of Athenian society in all its complexity, with participants representing every social class and occupational group within the community. Young men demonstrated their physical prowess through equestrian displays that recalled the mythological contests between gods and mortals, while musicians performed hymns that recounted Athena's birth from Zeus's head and her subsequent gifts to humanity. The inclusion of foreign residents and freed slaves in specific roles within the procession demonstrated how mythological narratives could be used to define social hierarchies while still acknowledging the contributions of non-citizens to the community's prosperity. The athletic competitions associated with the Panathenaea directly connected contemporary physical achievement with the heroic traditions established by mythological figures like Theseus and Heracles, creating continuity between legendary accomplishments and current human potential. Winners of these contests received prizes that included olive oil from trees sacred to Athena, linking their personal victories to the goddess's ongoing protection of the city while providing tangible rewards that could enhance their economic status. The competitions themselves were structured to emphasize qualities that mythological heroes had demonstrated: courage in combat sports, wisdom in strategic contests, and excellence in artistic performances that honoured the gods. The dramatic festivals, particularly the City Dionysia, transformed mythological narratives into theatrical experiences that engaged entire populations in collective exploration of moral, political, and theological questions raised by traditional stories. These festivals were not merely entertainment but civic rituals that used dramatic performance to examine the implications of mythological events for contemporary society. The selection of plays for performance was a political process that reflected community values, while the attendance of all citizens, including those whose participation was subsidized by wealthy sponsors, ensured that mythological themes reached every segment of the population. Aeschylus revolutionized dramatic presentation by creating trilogy structures that could explore the full implications of mythological cycles, his Orestia demonstrating how ancient stories of divine justice and family vengeance could illuminate contemporary legal and political developments, his treatment of Agamemnon's murder by Clytemnestra and the subsequent revenge by their son Orestes provided audiences with a framework for understanding how cycles of violence could be broken through the establishment of legal institutions that replaced personal vengeance with communal justice. The trilogy's conclusion, which showed the transformation of the Furies from agents of revenge into protectors of legal order, directly connected mythological transformation with Athens' own evolution, from tribal society to democratic city-state. The playwright's use of elaborate costumes, masks, and stage machinery created visual spectacles that made mythological events seem immediate and relevant to contemporary audiences. His actors, all male and wearing masks that amplified their voices while concealing their individual identities, became vessels through which ancient heroes and gods could speak directly to current citizens. The chorus, representing community voices and divine observers, provided commentary that helped audiences understand the cosmic significance of the dramatic action while connecting mythological events to current political and social concerns. Sophocles refined tragic drama by focusing on individual character development within mythological frameworks, his protagonists struggling with moral dilemmas that revealed universal aspects of human nature while remaining grounded in specific legendary contexts. His Oedipus Rex used the myth of the Theban king who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother to explore questions about fate, free will, and the limits of human knowledge that resonated with audiences facing their own uncertainties about divine intentions and personal responsibility. The play's structure, which gradually revealed information that the protagonist desperately sought while the audience already possessed, created dramatic irony that emphasized the gap between human understanding and divine knowledge. The playwright's Antigone examined conflicts between individual conscience and state authority through the mythological framework of Oedipus's daughter, who defied King Creon's order by burying her brother according to religious law. This treatment of mythological material provided Athenian audiences with a vehicle for discussing contemporary political tensions without directly challenging current leaders or policies. The play's exploration of competing claims of divine law, family loyalty, and civic duty offered multiple perspectives on moral decision-making, while using mythological distance to make controversial topics safer for public discussion. Euripides brought psychological realism to mythological characters, his tragedies presenting gods and heroes as complex individuals whose motivations and emotions reflected contemporary human experience rather than idealized heroic behavior. His Medea portrayed the legendary sorceress as a woman driven to infanticide by her husband's abandonment, transforming a mythological figure into a recognizable study of domestic conflict and female rage that audiences could understand through their own experiences. The play's sympathetic treatment of its protagonist, despite her terrible crimes, challenged traditional assumptions about heroic virtue while using mythological framework to explore taboo subjects like child murder and marital betrayal. The playwright's Bacchae examined the dangerous aspects of religious enthusiasm through the myth of Dionysus's return to Thebes, showing how divine power could destroy individuals and communities that either rejected or embraced it too completely. His presentation of the god as both liberating force and destructive agent reflected contemporary concerns about the role of religion in civic life, while using mythological narrative to explore the psychological and social consequences of religious experience. The play's conclusion, which showed the complete destruction of the royal family that had opposed Dionysus, served as both religious warning and political commentary on the dangers of absolute power. These dramatic presentations created shared cultural experiences that reinforced communal understanding of mythological themes while providing frameworks for discussing contemporary issues through the safe distance of legendary events. The annual cycle of dramatic festivals ensured that mythological narratives remained vital parts of civic discourse, rather than static religious doctrines, their meanings constantly renewed through fresh interpretations that addressed current concerns. The competitive nature of dramatic presentation encouraged innovation within traditional frameworks, as playwrights sought to win prizes by offering novel perspectives on familiar stories while respecting the religious and cultural significance of their source material. The integration of mythology into Greek educational systems ensured that these narratives shaped intellectual development from childhood through advanced philosophical training. Young Greeks learned to read using texts that recounted mythological adventures, their literacy development occurring through engagement with stories that simultaneously taught language skills and cultural values. The memorization of Homeric epics, required in most educational programs, provided students with comprehensive knowledge of mythological traditions while developing the rhetorical skills necessary for participation in democratic political processes. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey served as foundational texts that established literary standards while preserving mythological traditions in forms that could be transmitted across generations and geographical boundaries. The Iliad's treatment of the Trojan War created archetypal patterns for understanding heroic behaviour, military conflict, and the relationship between individual glory and communal responsibility that influenced Greek culture for centuries. The epic's detailed descriptions of combat, its psychological portraits of warriors facing death, and its exploration of honour codes provided models for understanding masculine virtue, while its treatment of divine intervention established frameworks for interpreting the role of gods in human affairs. The Odyssey's focus on Odysseus's journey home from Troy created complementary themes that emphasized intelligence, adaptability, and perseverance as heroic virtues equal in importance to martial prowess. The epic's episodic structure, which presented the hero's encounters with the various mythological figures and supernatural challenges, provided a comprehensive survey of Greek mythological traditions while demonstrating how legendary knowledge could be applied to practical problems. The poem's treatment of hospitality, loyalty, and the relationship between civilization and wilderness established cultural values that influenced Greek social behavior and political organization. Both epics used mythological frameworks to explore fundamental questions about human nature, divine justice, and the meaning of mortality that transcended their specific historical contexts. Their influence on subsequent Greek literature was so profound that later authors defined their own work in relation to Homeric models, either following established patterns or deliberately challenging them to create new artistic effects. The epic's combination of entertainment value with serious moral and theological content made them suitable for multiple levels of interpretation, appealing to popular audiences while providing material for sophisticated philosophical analysis. The philosophical interpretation of mythology began with thinkers who recognized that traditional stories contained insights about human nature and cosmic order that could be extracted through allegorical reading and rational analysis. These early philosophers did not reject mythological traditions, but sought to understand their deeper meanings by identifying the natural phenomena, psychological processes, or moral principles that mythological narratives represented in symbolic form. This approach allowed Greek intellectuals to maintain connection with their cultural heritage, while developing new methods of inquiry that would eventually lead to systematic scientific and philosophical investigation. Plato's complex relationship with mythology demonstrated both the potential value and the limitations of traditional narratives for philosophical education and political organization. His criticism of poets like Homer focused not on their artistic merit, but on their presentation of gods and heroes as morally flawed beings whose behavior contradicted the ethical standards that should govern human conduct. The philosopher argued that mythological stories could corrupt young minds by providing inappropriate role models, while their emphasis on divine caprice undermined the rational order that should characterize both cosmos and state. However, Plato also recognized mythology's power to communicate complex ideas through narrative forms that could reach audiences unable to follow abstract philosophical arguments. His own use of mythological elements in dialogues like the Republic demonstrated how traditional narrative structures could be adapted to serve philosophical purposes. His Myth of the Cave, using allegorical storytelling to explain epistemological concepts that would have been difficult to convey through pure logical argument. The philosopher's creation of original myths, such as his account of Atlantis, showed how mythological techniques could be employed to explore political and moral questions while maintaining the emotional impact that made stories memorable and persuasive. The Platonic Academy's approach to mythological interpretation established methods that would influence philosophical education throughout the ancient world, teaching students to identify the rational principles underlying traditional narratives while developing critical thinking skills that could be applied to contemporary problems. This educational program created generations of intellectuals who could appreciate both the cultural value of mythological traditions and their limitations as sources of reliable knowledge about natural phenomena or moral behavior. The Academy's influence on later philosophical schools ensured that mythological interpretation remained an important component of advanced education, even as scientific methods developed more sophisticated approaches to understanding natural processes. Aristotelian analysis of mythology focused on its literary and psychological functions, rather than its potential as disguised philosophy or corrupting influence on moral development. The Poetics examined tragic drama as an art form that used mythological material to create specific emotional effects in audiences, arguing that the experience of pity and fear generated by tragic performances served beneficial psychological and social functions. Aristotle's concept of catharsis suggested that mythological narratives could help individuals process difficult emotions while strengthening community bonds through shared emotional experiences. The philosophers' systematic approach to analysing mythological narratives established critical methods that influenced literary scholarship for centuries. His identification of plot structures, character types, and thematic patterns providing frameworks that could be applied to understanding both traditional stories and contemporary literary productions. His emphasis on the universal elements within particular mythological narratives suggested that these stories contained insights about human nature that transcended their specific cultural contexts, making them valuable for understanding psychological and social processes in any historical period. The transmission of Greek mythology through Roman adaptation created one of the most successful examples of cultural translation in ancient history, as Roman authors and artists transformed Greek narratives to serve Roman political and social purposes while preserving their essential characteristics and emotional impact. This process required careful balance between maintaining the authenticity that made Greek myths compelling and adapting them to Roman values and circumstances that differed significantly from their original cultural context. Virgil's Aeneid demonstrated how Greek mythological frameworks could be adapted to serve Roman imperial ideology while creating new literary masterpieces that rivaled their Greek predecessors. The epic's connection of Trojan refugees with Roman origins provided Romans with heroic ancestry that equaled Greek claims while justifying Roman conquest of Greek territories as recovery of ancestral lands. The poem's treatment of Aeneas as a hero whose personal desires were subordinated to divine mission and communal responsibility reflected Roman values that emphasized duty and sacrifice for state purposes rather than individual glory and personal achievement. The Aeneid's incorporation of Greek mythological figures like Venus, Juno, and Jupiter into Roman religious and political contexts created synthesis between Greek narrative traditions and Roman institutional needs. Virgil's presentation of these deities as supporters of Roman destiny transformed them from neutral or potentially hostile forces into active promoters of Roman imperial success. This adaptation demonstrated how mythological narratives could be modified to serve contemporary political purposes while maintaining their essential characteristics and emotional appeal. Roman historians like Livy used mythological traditions to create foundational narratives that connected contemporary Roman achievements with legendary precedents. Their accounts of early Roman history incorporating mythological elements that provided moral instruction while entertaining readers with dramatic stories. The historian's treatment of figures like Romulus and Remus, Horatius at the Bridge, and Lucretia combined mythological narrative techniques with historical analysis to create accounts that serve both educational and patriotic purposes. These stories establish behavioural models for Roman citizens while providing frameworks for understanding Roman values and institutions. The influence of Greek mythology on Roman art and architecture created visual languages that communicated cultural values while demonstrating Roman appreciation for Greek artistic achievement. Roman sculptors and painters adapted Greek mythological themes to decorate public buildings, private homes, and religious sites, their work serving both aesthetic and educational functions by making mythological narratives accessible to audiences regardless of their literacy levels. The popularity of mythological themes in Roman decorative arts ensured that these narratives remained vital parts of cultural discourse, even as political and religious circumstances changed. The enduring influence of Greek mythology on Western civilization reflects its success in addressing fundamental human concerns through narrative forms that combine entertainment value with serious exploration of moral, psychological, and spiritual questions. The mythological tradition's flexibility, which allowed it to be adapted to different cultural contexts while maintaining its essential characteristics, enabled it to survive the collapse of the classical world and continue influencing medieval, Renaissance, and modern culture. Renaissance artists and writers rediscovered Greek mythological themes through Roman sources, their works creating new syntheses between classical narratives and contemporary concerns that demonstrated mythology's continued relevance for understanding human nature and social organisation. The mythological revival during this period influenced developments in literature, visual arts, and political theory that shaped European culture for centuries while establishing patterns of classical reference that continue to influence Western artistic and intellectual traditions. Modern psychology's adoption of mythological terminology and concepts, exemplified by Freudian and Jungian analytical frameworks, demonstrates how ancient narratives continue to provide insights into human behaviour and mental processes that scientific approaches alone cannot fully capture. The use of terms like Oedipus complex, narcissism, and archetypal patterns in contemporary psychological discourse shows how mythological concepts have been transformed into analytical tools that help modern practitioners understand personality development, social relationships, and cultural phenomena. The persistence of mythological themes in contemporary literature, film, and popular culture reflects their continued ability to address universal human concerns through narrative forms that remain emotionally compelling and intellectually stimulating. Modern adaptations of mythological stories demonstrate how ancient narratives can be updated to address contemporary issues while maintaining their essential insights about heroism, justice, transformation, and the relationship between individual desires and social responsibilities. Greek mythology's legacy in classical civilization established patterns of cultural development that continue to influence Western society's understanding of literature, art, religion, and human nature. The mythological tradition's combination of entertainment and instruction, its exploration of moral and psychological complexity, and its ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential insights create a cultural foundation that has proven remarkably durable and influential. The integration of mythological narratives into educational, religious, and political institutions demonstrated how traditional stories could serve multiple social functions while providing frameworks for understanding both individual development and communal organisation. This comprehensive influence ensured that Greek mythology would remain a vital component of Western civilization long after the political and religious systems that had originally created it had disappeared, its narratives continuing to offer insights into the human condition that remain relevant across cultural and temporal boundaries.